tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size. Whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect, you do it. All of that green together, that truth, yeah. When I tell you the
Hello and welcome back to Cypherfics, guys. We are happy to have you back with us today in part 9 of What If Harry Potter Meets the Power Rangers. Make sure to like, share, subscribe and also press the bell icon so that you never miss a great update. Also make sure to check out the wonderful author 10star12 on fanfiction.net. Well, let's continue with the story now.
Harry was waiting in a line. It wasn't an especially novel situation, all told, but there hadn't been very many lines to wait in during his life after he left primary school, so he felt it worth noting. Next, please. Harry stepped forward as the line moved. The week and 3 days since the samurai fan man had trapped Kimberly and Harry in his dimensional prison jar had been rather interesting, although not in the normal Power Ranger-based way. Indeed, this short stretch of time had brought about not a series of monster battles, but a few rather dramatic changes in the relationship status of 3 members of the Ranger team. To start things off, the day after the fan man was beaten, Kimberly took the metaphorical bull by the horns and asked Tommy on a date. The typically shy teen had been taken aback at first, but had agreed all the same and later confessed that he had been trying to work up the courage to ask her out for some time. Kimberly had apparently later told Tommy of her conversation with Harry while they were trapped because the Green Ranger had spoken at length with the wizard during their next practice session. Tommy had expressed his thanks for helping get the relationship going, unintended though it may have technically been, and then proceeded to utterly annihilate him in a spar in a subtle form of revenge for any perceived embarrassment that Harry may have caused him. Harry was very tight-lipped about the conversation he had had with Kimberly, refusing to share details with Tommy even though he knew that there hadn't been much said about the Green Ranger specifically. He somehow felt that letting him know that most of his comments had been geared toward teasing Kimberly wouldn't have gone over much better anyway. Next, please. Harry stepped forward. The second relationship that started was one between Zach and his longtime crush, Angela Griggs. This particular relationship had been a long time coming, arguably longer than Kimberly and Tommy's. Zach had apparently been attempting to woo Angela for years, often with little to no success, but his persistence finally paid off and the girl had agreed to go on a date with him. It must have gone well, though Zach was telling no tales, because the couple were frequently seen together in the youth center and around town. Angela was a woman who volunteered to help with children a lot, babysitting and the like, so Zach often found himself drafted into the role alongside her, but he didn't find this to be any real trouble. With his quick wit and impressive dance moves, not to mention his hip-hop keto, Zach was able to entertain most children on his own, and when you tied that in with Angela's attitude and experience, they made a good team. Unlike Kimberly and Tommy, however, Zach wasn't dating within the team, so to speak, and Harry was a bit concerned as to whether or not the relationship would last under the pressure of Rita's attacks and Zach's responsibilities as a Power Ranger. It was a rather depressing thought in truth, so he chose not to dwell on it too much. Next, please. Another step forward. Still on the topic of Ranger relationships, a discussion with Zach on his own newfound and long-anticipated status change with Angela had brought up the topic of Billy and his maybe-girlfriend Marge. Harry had heard absolutely nothing about the girl since the whole Madame Woe debacle and so had ended up bringing her up with the Blue Ranger when next the group met for casual conversation. As it turned out, Billy and Marge regularly coordinate our daily schedules so that we can rendezvous and discuss the relevancy of various scientific theories and postulate on improving said theories through experimentation. Harry translated that with some help from Trini of course to mean that the two regularly met up to discuss things way over Harry's head, but weren't necessarily dating as such. But then again, what did he know about what a pair of socially awkward intellectuals would do on dates? Next, please. Step. For Harry's part, when he wasn't involved in discussions about the love lives of his fellow Rangers, his schedule was largely unchanged. He still spent mornings training with Zordon in using grid magic and most afternoons with Tommy in karate. He still worked at the youth center and practiced several minor close-up magic tricks in his downtime and showered his familiar with affection and bacon even though she didn't necessarily have to eat anymore. Hedwig loved her bacon. The biggest deviation from his schedule was a group training session put together by Tommy and Jason where all the Rangers met up on the Sunday after their most recent battle and sparred with each other. Jason had explained it away as a way to make sure everyone was staying up to scratch, purely as a precautionary measure of course, but Harry felt that it was more geared toward him and his own progress in the martial arts under Tommy's tutelage. After losing spectacularly to Jason, Tommy, Zach, and Trini, having only slightly less trouble before being beaten by Kimberly, and lasting nearly 3 minutes in a spar against Billy, Harry was pronounced to be well on his way in his education. Jason then made several comments on how Tommy was definitely better as Harry's teacher since he was able to focus solely on Harry, a fact that had clearly had positive results based on his observations. Harry politely neglected to comment on how Jason had been focused on Harry as well, just not for the best of reasons. Harry had just wanted to get out of the public park and away from the small crowd they had gathered so he could cast some healing charms to get rid of his new bruise collection. Aside from that, Kimberly had spent a bit more time talking with him since their shared ordeal. All in all, he was rather confused by it. Not that he at all regretted forming a closer friendship with another of his teammates, but he found himself constantly thrown off by the significant looks she would shoot him, especially when all the Rangers were gathered together. He figured she was trying to tell him something, but as he was only a male and singularly untalented with legitimacy, he found himself unable to figure out what it was. Next, please. Step. The final, and arguably most inconsequential, difference since the fan man's defeat was that Ernie had started paying him in weekly checks as opposed to cash. The man had claimed that it was for tax record purposes, which Harry understood in theory, but it brought about an entirely new issue for him. Harry had no idea how to go about cashing the checks. It was only then that he really started to understand Hermione's frustration about the separation between the magical and muggle worlds. Harry, having been isolated by his relatives for so long and then by Hogwarts and the war afterwards, was seriously lacking in muggle world survival skills that most everyone else he knew seemed to take for granted. It just so happened that checks, banks, and how to deal with the two together was on that list. Or at least banks not run by goblins. Luckily enough, Ernie had recognized his confusion upon handing over his first official paycheck the previous Friday and had quickly gleaned the reasons behind it. So it was that the lovable owner/operator of the Angel Grove Youth Center took Harry to Angel Grove National Bank to help him set up his own checking account under the guise of helping his British-born employee navigate the hazards of American banking. This was a comment that brought many a chuckle from the good-natured banking employees and several eye rolls from Harry. After the first introduction to the system, Harry figured the process out more or less and so felt confident enough to make future trips on his own. The fact that Ernie wouldn't be coming along to make any more teasing jokes at the expense of him and his British heritage had absolutely nothing to do with it, of course. But as inconsequential as the origin of these events was, it was still the base reason why on Friday, December 3, 1993, Harry James Potter found himself back the local branch of Angel Grove National Bank. Waiting in a line. Next, please. Harry stepped up to the counter, finally getting the chance to deposit his latest paycheck. He had been hoping to get in and out quickly, but for some reason there were only 2 tellers on duty that day. That would have been enough if one of them hadn't been kept occupied by tending to a constant stream of customers in the drive-through lanes, which led to the long wait. Putting his frustration aside though, Harry smiled at the red-haired woman behind the counter as he slid his debit card, endorsed paycheck, and filled out deposit slip across the counter. "Just depositing today, hon?" the woman said with a smile. "Yes, ma'am." Harry nodded, watching as she went about her job with efficiency born from repetition. Then, as the woman passed back his card and a receipt, things went wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," a strangely muffled voice shouted out from behind him, from the direction of the main doors. "This is a robbery." Harry spun in place, shock on his face even as he internally groaned. Leave it to the old Potter luck to get him into this kind of situation. At a quick glance, there were 6 men or so he assumed standing just inside the doors to the bank. Each of them was wearing a ski mask and each of them was toting some kind of a weapon. One was hefting a sizable sledgehammer while another wielded a baseball bat and kept twitching his head this way and that as if nervous. 3 of them were holding what looked like some kind of automatic rifle, though Harry knew far too little about guns to even guess as to what kind, and the last, the speaker, was holding a pistol in each hand. The other customers in the bank, a good 15 to 20 people counting Harry himself, seemed frozen in place. A few that Harry could see seemed so totally shocked that something like this was happening that they were completely beyond words for the moment. It seemed something so mundane as a bank robbery in Angel Grove threw its citizens off worse than a monster attack these days. Before any of the customers could start to panic, the speaker quickly took control of the situation. "So here's how this is gonna work. My associates here are gonna direct you all to the walls of this fine establishment. Once there, you will hand over any and all valuables you have on your person. This includes any credit cards, watches, purses, wallets, jewelry, etc. Any refusal to do so will result in you being injured most grievously. Any attempts at being a hero will result in you being shot. Any questions? No? Good. Gentlemen, if you would?" As 2 of the men with the automatic weapons stepped to either side of the glass doors, allowing them to play sentry as it were and also keeping them out of the line of sight from outside the bank. The third gunner flanked the speaker as he strolled idly around the lobby area of the bank as if on a pleasurable walk in the park. At the same time, the two without guns were directing the customers to either side of the lobby, shoving and cursing as they forced the still mostly shocked civilians into compliance. Harry took all this in grimly as his mind began spinning. The bank was a solid brick building with blinds closed down over the windows. The only clear line of sight into the building was through the drive-through windows in back and the doors in front. The thieves were careful to stay out of easy sight from the doors, and the likelihood of someone figuring out what was going on from the drive-through lane was relatively slim. The lobby itself was around 30 feet across with maybe 20 feet between the main doors and the teller's counter. The only furniture was a table in the middle of the room where various bank forms were kept and a few chairs up against the walls. Harry turned slightly to try and see what the two tellers were doing behind the counter, only to find the woman who had just finished helping him with his deposit holding a pistol of her own to the side of her coworker's head. Feeling his gaze upon her, the woman looked up and met his eyes with a smirk. "That's right, hon, no more help coming from this end." Harry turned back around when he heard a snort from nearby and found the speaker standing mere feet from him. "That's right, kid, we planned this whole thing out months ago. That's our girl on the inside who has done a wonderful job making sure things ran as smooth as possible for us. So why don't you just be a good little punk and move on over to the corner there?" The man gestured to the wall next to the counter and Harry backed away slowly, lifting his hands as the man pointed one of his pistols in his direction. When Harry felt his back hit the wall with the counter close to his left side, the man lowered his gun again and Harry let himself relax slightly. It was about this time that the two thugs with the hammer and bat pulled out a garbage bag each and started shaking down the hostages for their valuables. While the theft began in earnest, the insider behind the counter made her way out, shoving her former coworker before her at gunpoint and leaving the woman sobbing on the floor with some of the other hostages. "We've got a bit of a problem, boss. This bee managed to hit the silent alarm before I got to her. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the cops show." The speaker snorted before nodding, wrapping one of his arms around her waist as he spoke. "It's all in the plans, babe. We have enough hostages here to keep the cops off our backs long enough to ensure our getaway." As the two with the bags worked their way down either side of the room and with the speaker's comment still ringing in the air, one person, an older gentleman who had just been forced to hand over his watch, decided to comment. "You won't, you know. You won't get away with this. The Power Rangers will stop you." This seemed to cast a strange tension over the room as the criminals all looked toward him. Finally, the speaker began chuckling as he slowly walked toward the man. "You think that your precious Power Rangers are going to show up to stop a bank robbery? What makes you think they would even stoop so low?" "Pa!" The man scoffed, waving one of his guns lazily through the air as he stalked ever closer. "Those do-gooders are too busy worrying about that space bee that seems obsessed with your little city to even think of comparatively lesser dangers to law and order such as ourselves." By this point, the speaker had reached the man who was glaring at him defiantly. "To be honest, I would be completely surprised if even one of those costumed freaks showed up here. That was the entire point behind our plan after all." Turning away from the older man and with his machine gun-toting shadow following closely, the speaker strolled casually back toward the center of the room and leaned on the table there. "We noticed some time ago that the stories had changed a bit coming out of Angel Grove. I mean, who didn't notice the sudden monster attacks and the appearance of your costumed heroes to save the day, but what we noticed was the slacking off of the law enforcement and rescue services. This presented opportunity to our minds. Since the law was getting lazy, we decided to move in and help ourselves to the fruits of Rita's LBR, as it were." Harry cursed inwardly, but the man wasn't finished talking. "As it turns out, we weren't the only ones who noticed this trend, since that Purple Ranger guy was quoted by one of your local news stations, chastising said services about their slacking off. Well, when we saw that report, we knew that meant that we had to make our move sooner rather than later." Harry cursed again, glaring at the seemingly unconcerned criminals back even as he felt his saving people thing flaring up again. Here were a bunch of Angel Grove citizens in danger, and what's worse, it could be argued that they wouldn't have been in such danger if it hadn't been for his own comments on the day of the Pexter's attack. Harry was shaken out of his self-recrimination when the sledgehammer-toting bank robber blocked his view of the speaker. "All right, kid, hand over the stuff." Harry just scowled as he fished his bank card out of his pocket and dropped it into the man's bag with a glare. He knew that he needed to do something, but the presence of so many people meant he couldn't morph in here, and the presence of so many guns made him shy away from attracting attention to himself with any of his regular spell work. The man, however, wasn't satisfied with his contribution. "Come on now, you little effer, I know you have to have more than that on you, so hand it over." Harry met his eyes as he spoke. "Sorry to disappoint you, mate, but that's all I have." Oh yeah? The man raised an eyebrow before dropping his bag and grabbing Harry's left arm and wrenching it up. What about this watch then? Is this nothing? Harry could only watch, hiding a grimace as his shoulder protested his forced movement, as the man strpped his communicator off his wrist and dropped it into the bag. Now, seeing as you aren't being cooperative enough, I think I'm gonna have to be a bit more persuasive. Just remember, it's your own fault. Before Harry could comment, the man released his arm and buried his fist into Harry's stomach, knocking the wind out of him and dropping him to his knees. Several people nearby cried out in panic and protest, but a few warnings from the other bank robbers kept them back. Not so snarky now, are you little bstrd, the man crowed, bending down and grabbing Harry by the collar of his shirt, lifting him upright and slamming him back against the wall. Now hand over the rest of your valuables before I have to really hurt you. Harry just glared, a look the man matched before setting his sledgehammer aside and punching him in the stomach once more with his now free hand. He then used his left hand to keep Harry up against the wall while he started patting down his pockets with his right, immediately pulling Harry's wallet empty except for his Zordan Alpha-created ID from his front pocket and dropping it into his collection bag. At this point, Harry had only one thought in his mind. He currently had a rather valuable-looking coin in his back right pocket that this man would be only too happy to steal from him, almost definitely not even realizing what it was he was taking. Harry was momentarily stricken with the thought that he really needed to stop putting off making a charmed wand holster before it was brushed aside with a pure need to act and a brief rush of power from the grid. Just as the man reached around to check his back pockets, Harry lashed out with his right foot, planting a kick between the man's legs with enough force to cause him to release Harry as he stumbled back a step. Quickly regaining his balance, Harry followed his attack up with a gut punch of his own, doubling the man over before catching him in the nose with his knee and knocking the bank robber to the ground with blood gushing from his face. A click was Harry's only warning before a shot rang out and a lance of pain raced across the side of his right calf, dropping him to the floor once again. Several of the other hostages screamed while the speaker merely leveled his gun at Harry once again. I warned you, kid. You shouldn't have tried to play the hero, and killing one of you will only help in our negotiations with the cops, so. Knowing that he had only moments to act, Harry heaved himself up with his left leg, grabbing a hold of the countertop next to him as he rose and flipping up and over top of it to land hard in the teller's space behind it even as another shot flew past him, boring a hole in the brick wall of the building. Harry lay on his back, panting as his injured leg screamed at him from the sudden exertion. He knew that he needed to do something, to get his coin out and shift it to his wand so he could try and fight back if nothing else, but the pain was too much just then. Now what good do you think that's gonna do you, kid? The speaker taunted, his voice shifting as he, and presumably his shadow, walked closer to the counter. After all, it's not like it's gonna take me long to get back there. But if you'd rather die behind the counter in order to spare these other fine people the sight of your brains being splattered out the back of your head, then I suppose I don't mind the trip. He knew he had to think fast, but there wasn't really a whole lot he could do right then, and without his communicator, he couldn't really even call for backup. Come out, you little BRT, the speaker's voice was punctuated with the sound of the gate leading behind the teller's counter swinging open. Harry grimaced in pain as he settled on a plan, but gathered up his magic all the same before rolling across the ground and disapparated with an overly loud crack. He reappeared, gasping in pain, on the roof of the bank building and immediately clapped his right hand over his wounded leg, casting a wandless numbing charm and ignoring the numbing in his fingers in exchange for the sweet relief from pain. The bullet had only grazed him, but the bloody furrow it carved in his leg still hurt like crazy. Keeping his hand in place, Harry reached across his back with his left hand and, slowly but surely, fished his power coin out of his pocket. Alright, asshole, so you think none of the Power Rangers are gonna show up, huh? Let's see what you think of this. If anyone had been close enough, they would have heard a triumphant cry from atop the Angel Grove National Bank. Magi Ranger, power up. Within the bank building, the captive civilians were panicking. Many of them had heard the sharp crack and assumed that the brave young man who had tried to fight back against the criminals holding them was now dead. This was an idea that was brought into question when the speaker's voice came from behind the counter. Where the hell did that little SHT go? Mere moments later, he came stomping out from behind the counter, glaring around the room. Is he back out here? No, boss, the sledgehammer-wielding man replied, having mostly recovered from Harry's counterattack even as he was wiping blood from his face. Or at least he didn't come back over the counter. The angry gunman then spun to face the insider, one of his guns pointing at her in his anger. Jenny, is there anywhere back there he could have gone? The woman shook her head in a panic. And no. At least, I don't think so. I made sure all the doors back there leading into The rest of the building were locked up before you showed up, so nobody could escape that way, just like you asked. Then where the hell did he go? The man shouted, waving his weapons wildly. We were supposed to avoid all this weird CRP while we were here. Wadash. The speaker's ranting was cut off by a soft pop that nobody heard, followed by an ear-splitting crack that everyone did. When the criminals collectively turned toward the sound, they found that 4 of their captives were mysteriously gone. What? The speaker shouted before wheeling to face the man with the bat who had been closest to the vanished hostages. Where did they go? The twitchy criminal flinched beneath his ski mask. I dunno, Rocky, they were here just a second ago, and now they're not. The speaker, Rocky apparently, just scowled, jabbing the man in the chest with the barrel of one of his guns as he spoke. I know that, you moron, but where dash? Pop crack. Rocky spun around to find that fully half of his hostages from the other side of the bank were now missing. All right, that's it. Jenny, you keep an eye on that group, and Bones, he jabbed a gun toward the sledgehammer wielder, you watch those ones. This CRP ain't happening again. And Frankie, he jabbed at the twitchy man again, go get the money out from behind the counter. The twitchy man vanished behind the counter as quickly as possible. One of the men by the door leaned toward the other and whispered. I thought we wasn't using no names. His whisper hadn't been quiet enough though, as it managed to attract Rocky's attention, causing him to wheel around and face his fellow bank robber. And all that went right out the effing window when this freaky SHT started happening. All of our plans are CRP now. His eyes widened as he glanced out the glass doors and saw the familiar red and blue lights of the police force reflecting off of windows and cards across the street from the bank. And now the F-cops are here and we're running out of bargaining chips, he howled in fury, attracting the attention of the rest of the room as everyone tried to catch sight of the police, either in desperate denial or in fear. Pop crack. Rocky whirled around again only to find the group of hostages that were under the guard of Jenny were now missing. UFB. Where did your hostages go? Jenny turned back around herself only to go pale as she saw that her charges were indeed gone. She stuttered as Rocky stalked toward her, raising one arm as if to hit her with his gun only to be interrupted when Frankie came out from behind the counter, his garbage bag now bulging with money in addition to the stolen valuables he had taken from the hostages. I got it all, boss, should we hit the vault now? Rocky scowled, lowering his arm much to Jenny's relief. We don't have time for that anymore. The cops are here and we're almost out of hostages. He paused for a moment as his eyes trailed over the last 4 cowering civilians. Finally, he stood straight. All right, here's what we're gonna do. Frankie, you take the loot from Bones. Bones, you and Jenny don't take your eyes off of those hostages. We're gonna need them if we're gonna get out of here without metal bracelets. Pop pop. When the noises sounded from the opposite side of the room from the hostages, all the criminals in the room spun to face it, brandishing their guns, and so they were unprepared for the next series of noises. Pop thud crack. Rocky spun back around in time to see Bones stumbling and falling to the ground just as his final hostages disappeared in the company of what looked like a figure dressed in purple. Harry was kinda having fun at this point. He had managed to silently apparate back to his place behind the counter with a disillusionment charm in place and watched as the bank robbers flipped out over his disappearing act. While watching, he noticed a chance to get some of the hostages free and took it, sacrificing his complete silence while operating for enough speed to get a group of 4 hostages outside the building before silently operating back to his initial position. He had to force down a few snickers, especially after he rescued the second group, 5 people this time, and Rocky freaked out even more. When the police had shown up, Harry was more than happy with their timely response to the silent alarm. He had managed to use that as a distraction to get another group of 3 out, clearing out the hostages from one side of the room. When Rocky started to try and plan things out more, Harry had to plan a bit himself, but it was relatively easy to relax his hold on his silence a bit more and draw their attention away from the remaining hostages. Then he had taken a great deal of satisfaction in knocking Bones away from the final 4 before operating them all out of the bank. He took a moment then to catch his breath, noting that the police and rescue services personnel were moving to SCRT the hostages to get checked out by some EMTs, before turning to face the bank again. Before he could head back in to finish things, a police officer grabbed his arm. Thanks for the help, Magi Ranger. Sir, do you want us to take it from here? Harry smiled beneath his helmet before shaking his head. Nah, I think I can handle this, officer. Thanks for the offer though. It's just a good thing I was in the area when this went down. It seems that they had an insider that was supposed to keep anyone from alerting you guys. Then who pressed the silent alarm? Harry shrugged. The other teller managed to set it off before she got caught by the insider. I was told this by the first hostage I rescued. He got shot, in the leg I think, but I dropped him off elsewhere before returning for the others. I was in a bit of a hurry at first. I'll make sure to bring him back after these guys are dealt with. With a final nod and a brief look of concern, the officer released Harry's arm and watched as he stalked toward the bank doors. Harry was mildly amused to note that the robbers had locked the doors now and, from what he could see, appeared to have barricaded themselves behind the teller's counter. Chuckling slightly, Harry waved his hand and magically unlocked the doors before strolling in as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Well, he drawled. What do we have here? I understand you guys didn't think your little stunt in here wouldn't attract the attention of any of the Power Rangers, yes? It's a good thing I happened to wander by. Rocky seemed to have lost his earlier longing to talk. Waste this freak. With that, the bank robbers opened fire, 3 pistols and 3 automatic rifles letting out gouts of flame and lead faster than most could react. Most people were not Harry Potter and or the Magi Ranger though. Almost yawning, Harry conjured up a transparent shield of kinetic force with grid power, causing the bullets to come to a full stop in midair, deforming slightly as their own energy was negated and even bled off to reinforce Harry's shield, before dropping to the ground. When the gunfire finally stopped, Harry stepped forward and scowled beneath his helmet. You know I really don't like that word. As the criminals scrambled to reload, fear and panic clear on their faces, Harry just waved his hand and cast a summoning charm. None of that now. With the guns floating in the air before him, Harry slowly and obviously closed his fist and they each crumpled in midair under the influence of his kinetic magics until they were little but oddly shaped ball of metal. Rocky. And the others just looked shocked, but the leader quickly got over it and drew a knife from his belt. I ain't getting taken in by some wannabe in tights. The man vaulted over the teller's counter and covered the few steps between them in seconds. He brought his knife up and tried to stab Harry in the stomach, but telegraphed his move so badly that it was mere child's play for the ranger to deflect the attack to the side. Not one to be put off so easily, Rocky brought his blade back and tried again. Don't care who you are or what you may think you can do. He grunted as Harry deflected yet another attack, but he continued doggedly. I'm gonna kill your butt. By now the rest of his gang, minus Jenny who seemed paralyzed in fear, had scrambled to join their leader. Bones and Frankie were still using their weapons of choice, but 2 of the other 3 had drawn knives of their own while the last one was bare-fisted. Harry just shrugged and worked their presence into his defense. With Rocky and the 3 gunmen up so close, the other 2 were unable to bring their weapons into play without running the risk of hitting their comrades, and so Frankie and Bones were staying back. This meant that Harry could focus on fewer targets and with grid power running through him it was an almost negligible task. Unfortunately for Harry, he let his overconfidence run a bit too high again. This was proven when he felt a heavy impact on the back of his head, dropping him to the ground from the sheer force. "Huh. That'll show ya, you F-butt." Rocky taunted, panting. "Good work, Bones." "Thanks, boss." Harry was inwardly cursing himself for letting down his guard. Just because nothing these common criminals did was able to actually hurt him and he was more than a little glad that his suit and protected him from the blow from Bones's sledgehammer, that didn't mean he should take them any less seriously than one of Rita's monsters. While the thugs taunted and jeered at him, Harry just scowled before attempting to climb back to his feet. "Oh no you don't." Frankie cackled, sweeping Harry's left arm out from under him with what would have been a bruising swing of his bat were he not in morph, and stay down. "Hey, boss, we've got a Power Ranger for a hostage now." Rocky laughed in response. "Yeah, I suppose we do. And you suppose wrong," Harry announced just before releasing a wave of kinetic energy from his body, serving to knock the 6 away from him and onto their backs while Jenny just screamed from behind the counter. Harry climbed once more to his feet, noting that his opponents had as well, and shook his head. "I really only have myself to blame for this. I shouldn't have been playing with you bloody wankers. But, fun time is over now. Oh well. Stupefy." Harry pointed toward Bones as he cast, releasing the red bolt of a stunning spell along with a few sparks as his suit protected him from the wandless backlash. As expected, Bones collapsed bonelessly when the spell hit, which sent Rocky into another rage. "Get that freak." As the now 5 criminals prepared to charge, Harry just growled and moved his hands out to either side. "I already told you, I do not like that word. Incarcerus." From the palms of his hands, a surge of conjured ropes erupted, twining about each other as they wound their way through the air and toward the now backpedaling thugs. In mere moments, Rocky and his gang, including the unconscious Bones, were trussed up like pigs and floating merrily through the air, attached to a rope that Harry held in one gloved hand. Smirking at them from behind his helmet, Harry idly strolled over toward the counter before leaning over to catch sight of the still cowering Jenny. "So, are you gonna come along peacefully, or would you rather make things difficult?" When the Magi Ranger emerged from the bank with 6 would-be bank robbers tied up and floating behind him with the 7th trailing at the end with her hands bound, a cheer erupted from the watching crowd of civilians. Harry just waved his free hand idly, jerking the rope with his other and bringing forth a bevy of complaints from his captives as they bobbed through the air in response. When a pair of officers approached him, Harry passed the rope over to the nearest one. The spell on the rope will last about 30 minutes before they'll drop, so I would recommend cuffing them before then. The officer just looked stunned for a second before a look of childish glee overtook his face as he tugged on the rope and led the criminals through the air and towards the barricade of police cars and his fellow officers so they could be processed. In the meantime, the other policeman was just staring at him in confusion. "I have to ask, if you don't mind, sir, but how did you know what was going on?" The man spoke with a rather strong Irish accent, a fact that Harry found mildly amusing, but knew he would have to suppress that as the question, and indeed the entire situation, wasn't really conducive to levity. "Just like I told the idiots who decided to try and rob the bank today," Harry said with a shrug. "I just happened to be in the area. I heard the first pair of gunshots and popped in there to rescue the victim before getting the other hostages out." He shrugged again. "It was all a coincidence really, but I'm glad I was able to help. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go and get said gunshot victim and send him back here. I have a few other things I need to take care of so." The officer blinked twice in quick succession before snapping to attention and saluting him. "Of course. With everything you and the other rangers do for us, I think we can take care of the rest of things here today. Thanks you, sir, for everything you've done today and everything you have done and will do in the future. We all appreciate what you rangers do for us." Harry was feeling more than a bit embarrassed at this point, but managed to do his best to mimic the officer's salute. "Happy to be of assistance, officer." And with that he spun in place and operated back to the roof of the bank and out of sight where he immediately slumped in relief. "DMN," Harry sighed. "That wasn't fun. Why is it that I have an easier time with fighting against people than dealing with the public?" Shaking his head at his own rhetorical question, Harry demorphed and immediately fell to the ground as his injured leg made itself known once again now that the power of his suit wasn't helping to support him. Ah bloody hell, Harry looked at his right calf, finding the bottom half of his right pants leg soaked in BLD that also managed to run down into his shoe. "That's gonna make things fun, let's see here." With a bit of focus, Harry renewed the numbing charm and cast a few minor healing charms to slow the bleeding. As much as he would like to fix himself up right away, he knew that he needed to make an appearance as himself and it might not make much sense to the emergency workers for him to be completely unharmed when he had so much BLD on his clothes. There were just some questions he didn't feel like dealing with at the moment. With a sigh, Harry operated once more, reappearing with a loud crack close to where he had been standing earlier and found himself almost immediately caught by the surprised Irish policeman as his leg gave out. "Hey there now. I got ya, son." Harry forced a smile through his irritation at the weakness in his injured leg, offering his thanks as the officer helped him limp his way over to the EMTs. "I can't believe you did that." Oddly enough, Jason was unhappy. And there was a great deal of disbelief inherent in that statement because Harry had honestly hoped that, seeing as he had used his powers to help save a bunch of innocents from a group of individuals who had no issue whatsoever with shooting someone, he figured that acting as a hero, even if it wasn't against Rita's forces, would be perfectly acceptable to the stern leader of the mighty Morphin Rangers. Though if he was honest, Harry was quite surprised that Jason had managed to keep his anger in check until he had finished his story. Keeping his thoughts to himself even as Hedwig nuzzled his face reassuringly from her perch on his shoulder, Harry just sighed. "I morphed to apprehend a group of gun-toting bank robbers and then had to use some wandless magic to recover my stolen property, including a few Confundus charms to make the emergency workers let me go without a completely unnecessary trip to the hospital. Why is this a problem?" They were currently in the command center, the other 6 rangers having only just teleported in a few minutes before. Only really long enough for Harry to give a very general overview of his most recent adventure. Apparently though, Jason had heard about it on the news at the youth center, something that didn't surprise Harry at all since Ernie always gathered everyone's attention when there was a report about the Power Rangers on the little television he kept at the counter, and had had time to form his own opinions about what Harry had done. "I can't believe you morphed against a bunch of regular people," Jason continued with a glare, dismissing Harry's question. "Those powers are meant to be used against Rita and her forces only. You can't just do things like that." Harry felt his temper building now in response to the utter ridiculousness Jason was spouting. "And why the hell not? The guy freaking shot me in the leg and you expected me to just apparate out and leave the other hostages there to fend for themselves? Do you honestly think you would have done anything different?" Jason paused at this, clearly unable to refute Harry's statement, before he blinked and renewed his rant on a new angle. "It doesn't matter, because you've broken your oath." Harry just slumped and rolled his eyes. "Oh, have I?" he drawled as he lifted a hand, a single finger extended. "Lumos." The tip of his finger lit. "Nox." The light went out and he lowered his hand before shrugging. "No, it seems as though I didn't, otherwise I would have already lost my magic." Jason just looked stumped. "But you escalated a battle and used your powers against a normal person. That has to be against the oath, isn't it, Zordon?" His face took on a look of utter confusion as he and the other Rangers turned to face their mentor. Zordon hummed in thought for a second. "I do not believe that Harry's actions were outside of even the oath I asked for from you, Jason. But you must remember that Harry swore a different oath himself. As I recall, Harry swore to never use his power for evil, but cautioned that he would not stand aside and let evil happen if he could stop it." Jason looked shocked. Apparently the thought that he would have been able to take similar actions to Harry's, and indeed might have been expected to in this case, hadn't really occurred to him. Zordon continued. "While I do not necessarily condone using your power to search out any and all sources of criminal activity you possibly can, I also cannot agree with simply standing aside and letting such actions happen with your knowledge." "But Zordon," Billy piped up. "Didn't you tell us that most people in Angel Grove would be affected by the morphing grid to prevent extreme violence such as that exhibited by the bank robbers today?" Zordon bobbed his disembodied head in a nod. "That is correct, Billy. But the individuals in question admitted to Harry that they were not from Angel Grove. In this case, they were outside the influence of the grid's positive energies while they planned their actions, though the extreme and irregular reactions of the leader could well be attributed to the grid. As I said, Bulk and Skull's bumbling nature is most likely because of the grid's influence on them, so a similar process could have started on these criminals from another city." Jason seemed to regain cognitive thought and opened his mouth once again. "But Harry's actions put our secret identities at risk. His being there during the robbery means someone could connect him with the Magi Ranger and then the other Rangers with us, despite any protection granted by the morphing grid." Zordon shook his head. "The grid will keep anyone from connecting the magical effects to Harry himself. Any confusion will be attributed to the Magi Ranger alone. This is one way the grid helps to protect your anonymity with the public. By preventing the association of any supernatural effects with your public identities. And it's not like I was there just to break up the robbery, Jason." Harry calmly interjected, running his fingers through Hedwig's feathers to help calm himself. "It's like I told the Bobbies, it was a coincidence that I was there to stop it all in the first place. I won't say that I wouldn't do it again given the opportunity, but I didn't go looking for them." Jason shook his head angrily and scowled, but before he could open his mouth to speak, Zack put a calming hand on his shoulder. "Jace, just let it go, man. Like he said, any of us would have done the same thing." "Yeah," Kimberly piped up. "And Zordon said that he wasn't gonna hold it against Harry anyway." Billy nodded as well. "And it is clear that he hasn't violated the terms of his own oath to Zordon." Tommy stepped up to Jason's other side and added his own 2 bits. "And nobody saw anything that would lead to discovering his identity, so as far as I can see, we're all covered." Trini, a grim look on her face, walked past Jason and over to Harry. "And aside from all that, he got hurt while saving all those people. That should at least grant him some sympathy and leeway here. Pull up your breathe leg, Harry. I want to take a look at where you were shot." Despite Harry's protests, Trini managed to force him to sit on the back of one of the computer banks before pulling up his bloody breathe leg to take a look at his injury. The EMTs had wrapped his leg in gauze and bandages to help staunch the bleeding before taking him to the hospital, but Harry's magic had caused them to release him at that point. He just hadn't had a chance to heal himself up yet. Trini was picking at the bandages, probably trying to find a loose end so she could unwind it and take a look at his actual injury when Jason snapped out of his stupor. His emotions were already running high from his own outrage at Harry's actions that were so far beyond what the Power Rangers were supposed to do, and it was only made worse by the fact that everyone else saw absolutely no problem with it. And now seeing Trini all but abandon her longtime friend to fuss over the new guy, he just snapped. "Of course you're only worried about Harry, Trini. Why be worried about what kind of an impact that his actions could have on all of us when he's hurt? The only reason you're even supporting him is because you have a crush on him." Harry blinked as he whipped his head up from watching Trini's actions to Jason's outraged face. Then he swept his eyes over the rest of the group, taking in Zack and Tommy's slight scowl toward Jason, Billy's look of confusion, and Kimberly's outright pissed off expression. Then he turned to Trini, who was frozen in place, staring blankly ahead with her face lit up in the most extreme blush the Magi Ranger had ever seen. Almost all at once, Harry felt like he had just been bashed in the head by Bones's sledgehammer again. The looks he had seen Trini give him on occasion and how she always seemed extra happy whenever Harry helped her with anything. Kimberly's questions as to his love life while they were in the fan man's jar now took on a whole new light, as well as the significant looks he had been unable to figure out since then. Trini liked him. Trini liked him. And Harry had absolutely no idea how to react. Luckily enough, Trini acted instead. Standing slowly, Trini turned away from Harry and walked over to Jason. Without saying a word, she drew back and slapped him across the face before teleporting out in a column of yellow light. For several seconds, nobody moved. Even the constantly flashing lights and beeping computer terminals of the command center seemed frozen and silent in the wake of Jason's angry revelation and Trini's reaction. Jason himself seemed to realize immediately that he had gone too far, and Trini's smack only reinforced that. He just slumped in on himself, sliding down the side of a computer console to sit on the ground, his head in his hands. Kimberly stepped up next to him and nudged him with her foot until he looked up. "Unless you feel like there are any more private matters that you want to tell the class, I'm gonna go check on Trini." When Jason shook his head, his sorrow written all over his apologetic face, Kimberly turned to Harry. "Hey, give me a bit and I'll call you on the communicator to come and talk to her yourself, alright?" When Harry merely nodded dumbly, still not quite processing everything, Kimberly nodded back and teleported out herself to start searching for her longtime friend. Finally, after a few more minutes of silence from all and sundry, Harry found his voice. "Trini likes me? She has a crush on me?" Zach started chuckling, the sound cutting through the air and relieving the majority of the tension like a hot knife through butter. "Yes, Harry, she likes you. I can't believe you didn't see it yourself, man. I mean, you picked up on Kimberly liking Tommy easily enough, so I figured," he shrugged. Then again, it was pretty obvious with the way Kim was acting and Trini was a bit more circumspect. Tommy chuckled this time, ignoring the fact that he had been as oblivious to Kimberly's attraction to him as Harry had been to Trini's. "That's a pretty big word for you there, Zach. You been studying with Billy?" When the laughter from the joke had run its course, even Billy getting in a bit of laughter despite still being rather bewildered by the entire situation, Jason finally spoke again. "I'm sorry everybody, I saw the headline on the news at the youth center, but all I really saw was Magi Ranger and Harry Potter in the same place and jumped to conclusions about you blowing the secret. The rest just escalated from there." When nobody responded, Harry decided to step up. "I don't think you really need to apologize to anyone currently here, Jason, but I doubt Trini will be up to speaking to you for a little while." Jason glanced up at him, a teasing glint in his eye. "Yeah, I should probably let you talk to her first though, shouldn't I?" Harry just groaned while the other male rangers laughed at his expense. All may not have been forgiven, but things were at least set aside for now. "So are you and Pretty Yellow finally going to stop dancing around each other and begin preparations for a mating flight, Harry/Wizard?" Harry was too busy choking on his own spit to explain his reaction to any of the other rangers. When Kimberly's call finally came, Harry teleported to a remote corner of Angel Grove Park to find Trini sitting alone on a park bench. With nobody else visible in the area, Harry found himself walking over to her, his leg newly healed, and sitting next to her as calmly as he could. After a few minutes of silence, Harry cleared his throat nervously. "So?" Trini sighed. "So?" A few seconds later, they both broke into nervous laughter. "Why is this so hard to do?" Trini asked. Harry shrugged, shooting her a smile. "You've got me. I've never really been in this situation myself." Trini's own smile drooped a bit, but rebounded quickly. "You'd think that after Jason spilled the beans like he did it would just be a quick yes or no thing, wouldn't you?" She trailed off for a moment before shaking her head. "But Kim explained some of what you told her about your relationship history or lack thereof, so I know I really can't expect things to be that easy." Harry sighed before turning to face her. "I really don't know what to say here, Trini. It's not that I don't like you or don't find you attractive, I do, but it's like I told Kimberly, I don't see what I have to offer anyone." Trini held up a hand to cut him off and took a deep breath, fortifying herself. "When I look at you, I see a friend. I see a guy who was willing to put his life on the line to help us in our fight when he really didn't have to. The fact that Rita has something of yours means nothing in this case. I see a comrade in arms that I would trust with my life and an ally that I know I can always count on. I also see the shy person beneath that battle-hardened exterior. I see a nice guy who is not at all unattractive who I would like to see if I can get to know better. To see if we could have a relationship together. I know you feel like there's a lot in the way of having a relationship like this, but all I'm asking is that you give it a chance." Harry stared at her blankly before closing his eyes and nodding firmly, mostly to himself if he was honest. "All right, I suppose we should just give this a shot then? Take a chance and see how things progress." Trini's answering smile lit up her face in happiness. Yeah, we can see how it goes. Moving just a bit awkwardly, Harry lifted his right arm before draping it over her shoulder and pulling her into a hug that she quickly returned. Suddenly a thought occurred to him and he chuckled into her shoulder. For what it's worth, Hedwig approves. Trini snorted before pulling out of their hug with a blush on her face only to snuggle back in under his arm while he held himself somewhat stiffly. Well, she finally answered. That's practically familial approval right there. And I would hate to see what she would have done if she hadn't approved. The two were silent after that. Lost in their own thoughts as they stared into the distance, his arm over her shoulder and her leaning into him. Ready 1. Punch 2. Block 3. Punch 4. Back 5, and Ki. Harry shuffled one of his decks of playing cards as he watched Jason teaching his karate class. The customers weren't as plentiful today, most likely because of the holiday festivities going on in Angel Grove. With his area behind the counter cleaned up and Ernie back to mixing up various fruit smoothies, Harry was left with little to do to alleviate his boredom than practice his up-close magic tricks. It had been a whirlwind few weeks since Harry's involuntary involvement with the bank robbery. There was a lot going on in Angel Grove in general and with the other Rangers in particular, with school out and all of the holiday preparations happening, but Rita was strangely quiet. There wasn't so much as a single monster attack, heck not even a putty sighting on the news, and the nervous tension they felt had quickly been overcome by holiday spirit. As it was, Kimberly and Trini were out braving the shopping crowds with Tommy tagging along, a boyfriend duty Harry only avoided due to his shift at the youth center. Jason was teaching his class at the youth center while Zach and Billy sparred nearby, working on the Blue Rangers form. Harry, of course, was scheduled to work and with the sparse crowd was resigned to his relative boredom as he held a deck of cards in one hand and tried to maneuver the top one just right to get it to jump off the deck so he could catch it in his free hand. It was rather slow going. A few of the tricks he had been practicing came to him fairly easily. Basic card tricks and the like were typically just a lot of methodical shuffling and sleight of hand that he found came somewhat easily to him after so many years of delicate control for wand movements and the like. Most of the small, non-card tricks relied on that same sleight of hand as well as quick movement to distract the observers while he set up the trick. But some of these more complex card tricks were giving him some difficulty. And don't even get him started on the one attempt he had made at throwing the cards. More than once he had been tempted to use his own magic to ease things along. Just make the cards or props or what have you behave like the trick was designed to make them appear to, in reality, as opposed to the illusion created by the magician. He had expressed his dilemma to Zordon and the other Rangers in passing and they had all convinced him to keep working at it. He had actually been quite embarrassed after the slight telling off he had gotten from them at what they saw as him trying to take shortcuts as opposed to working at it. Ultimately though, he had redoubled his efforts to learn to do this type of magic the proper way. But if and when he got to the point where he was doing bigger magic and performances, he couldn't make any promises. But aside from learning issues, with his magic tricks and his more practically applicable studies with Tommy and Zordon, Harry had had a rather nice few weeks. Ever since he and Trini had decided to start dating, the two had spent time together every day, even if it was only on Harry's lunch break or a few hours when Trini could get free of family obligations on her holiday break long enough to meet up. Though they had managed a few more traditional dates when their free times and available funds lined up, their more NTMT interactions had been limited to hand-holding and cuddling as they had in the park after Jason's reveal, as they had both agreed to take things slowly. Zach and Kimberly, though to a lesser extent than Zach, hadn't been terribly amused when they had found out about the new couple's self-imposed pace. The both of them had been looking for, as Zach put it, tales of wandering hands and stolen moments in shady corners. Harry and Trini had exchanged a look before blushing and turning away from each other immediately. They were both too shy/socially awkward for that to be a viable option in their minds, at least at this early point in their relationship anyway. In the end, Zach had taken every opportunity for some light-hearted teasing of the new couple while Kimberly just dragged Trini off after each date and spent time giggling with her and shooting him looks while Trini blushed. Jason had, after a very awkward apology to the entire team for his outburst and specifically to Trini and Harry, largely left them alone. Tommy was completely supportive of his fellow Rangers' relationship and Billy had wished them both well in his own verbose fashion. "Hey, are you Harry Potter?" an accented voice asked from nearby. Turning towards it, Harry's eyes fell upon a dark-skinned man, probably similar in age or slightly older than Harry himself, wearing jeans and a brightly tie-dyed t-shirt. Relatively nondescript in his features, he had one of those faces that would simply blend into a crowd. Rather forgettable all things considered. Taking a moment to gather himself, Harry nodded in return. "I am. What can I get for you?" As he spoke, he idly tucked his cards into his pants pocket and moved closer to the grill. The man, however, shook his head with a wide smile on his face. I actually don't need any food, Mon. You see, I'm here because I heard you're a magician. I want to hire you. Harry blinked, shook his head slightly, and then blinked again. I'm sorry, sir, he said, feeling his cheeks heat up. But I'm not really anywhere near being ready to do any actual performances or anything. I'm still learning the basics, to be honest. The man just waved his hands, as if dismissing Harry's statement. I don't need any big tricks or anything. It's for my little sister. She's on a bit of a magic kick right now, what with the magi ranga running around and all. I promised her I would try and get someone to show her some magic tricks, and maybe teach her a few of them so. Harry groaned internally as he stared at the man, debating with himself in his head. I don't know. Come on, Mon, the man's voice was taking on a pleading tone now. She's only 6 years old and she really wants to see some magic. Harry was feeling even worse about it now. Did the guy have to mention that his sister was only a child? I can pay too. How about $100 for whatever time you can give? Harry groaned inwardly once more. While he wasn't quite as strapped for cash as he could have been, an extra 100 wouldn't go amiss to help keep him fed and such, not to mention funding future dates with Trini. With a heavy sigh, Harry shot the anxious-looking man a weak smile. All right, I might be able to help you out. So long as you understand that I don't really have anything too incredible in my repertoire just yet. The man looked ready to start dancing in place, he was so excited. Excellent. I was hoping you would agree, Mon. She is going to be so happy. Harry just stared, a little shocked at the man's over-the-top reaction. Before he could say anything though, the man had slid a piece of paper across the counter and continued speaking in his jubilant voice. Here is our address. When can you come by? Harry's brain seemed to be spinning in place with how quickly everything was happening. Well, my shift ends in about an hour and I would need to head home to pick up a few things. So give it a few hours then? Thank you so much, Mon. You have no idea. And with that the man turned on his heel and left. It was only after he had passed out of sight that Harry realized he had never gotten his name. Before his shift ended, Ernie had managed to get Harry to explain the whole situation to him. The kind-hearted man was more than a bit amused at how off-balance Harry was with the entire transaction, but helped him with directions to the suburban address the man had left all the same. Once Ernie had finished teasing him, Hedwig had started in. At first, she seemed rather uneasy about the entire situation, but when neither of them were able to reason as to why, she set aside her concerns in favor of all but ordering Harry to bring her along. Aside from her normal attitudes toward protecting Harry, she admitted to wanting to see some of Harry's new magic for herself, if only to tease him about it later on. So it was that after ending his shift at the youth center and letting Zach, Billy, and Jason know what he was doing, he teleported back to the command center, collected his supplies after informing Zordon and Alpha of what was going on, and teleported once again to a location relatively near his destination, Hedwig riding along on his shoulder. Idly looking around him as he walked down the quiet suburban street on the outskirts of Angel Grove, Harry took in the houses around him. Far from the uniformity of Privet Drive he had grown up around, each house he passed gave of a feeling of individuality and pride as he looked upon them. From the carefully tended gardens and lawns to a few trimmed hedges, bushes, and trees, and the well-maintained houses themselves, the entire neighborhood just resonated with happiness to him. It was a feeling that he tried to take in as best he could to combat the nervousness building within him at what was technically his first job as a magician, simple though it was. A mere 5 minutes of walking later, Harry caught sight of a group of people loitering on the lawn in front of one of the houses ahead of him. The group was standing near a long wooden table with a few chairs set up nearby. As he got closer, he vaguely recognized the accented man who had hired him, mostly because of his clothing surrounded by about 8 children. Feeling some trepidation at the fact that his audience went from one little girl and her brother to at least 8, Harry barely managed to keep himself moving forward. Shortly after he spotted his client, the man spotted him as well. "Harry, you're early." Harry waved back to him with his hand not holding onto the rolling suitcase he had conjured to carry his supplies and careful to not dislodge Hedwig in the process. He waited until he was close enough to not have to shout back before responding. "Yeah, I figured I may as well get going before I lost my nerve." The man chuckled. "Well, we wouldn't want that, would we? My sister would be so disappointed." Harry just laughed along with him, though a touch uneasily, before turning his attention to the 8 strangely silent kids standing in the yard. "So which one of these is your sister? Oh, and I don't think I caught your name earlier either." The man seemed to recoil slightly, a strange look flashing across his face before he responded. "I never did mention my name, did I?" He scratched the back of his head and laughed weakly. "Sorry about that, Mon. The name is Michael." He extended a hand to Harry for a handshake, which the Magi Ranger quickly took. As soon as they grasped hands, Harry felt Hedwig's talons tense up slightly on his shoulder. Harry/wizard, she said evenly. Bad feeling is back again. This man feels wrong. I do not know why, but... Harry narrowed his eyes a fraction as the two men shook hands, but he couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. I'll keep my eyes open, Hedwig, but we're already here now, so, aloud, he reminded the man of his other question. And your sister is? The man again seemed to flinch, though this time his face took on a bashful look. You see, the thing is she isn't here yet. Harry just met his gaze with a flat look. The man started chuckling again. Our parents took her out earlier, and they aren't home yet. I was kinda hoping for you to be a surprise for her, but one of her friends asked what I was setting up out here, and when I told her she told some other kids, and he gestured helplessly to the group of still quiet children behind him. Harry groaned to himself again before taking another breath and nodding firmly. Well, let's get things going then, eh? Michael started before nodding towards the still somewhat tense form of Hedwig on Harry's shoulder. What about the bird? Not that I'm complaining, but... Harry shrugged, again carefully to avoid dislodging his familiar. This is Hedwig. I've had her since I was 11 and she is perfectly safe to have around the children. I figured if worst came to worst and your sister wasn't impressed with my magic tricks, he shrugged again. Well, she always gets a good reaction from the kids who see her at the youth center. The man's eyes brightened again. Got it. Plan B. He chuckled again before gesturing Harry toward the table set up in his yard. After you then, oh great owl magician. You see kids, there's this ghost that follows me around. Harry leaned forward slightly, prompting the kids to do the same. Personally, he was just glad they had started reacting more normally, read with childish noise and enthusiasm after he had started with a few magic tricks. It had been about 20 minutes and Michael's sister still hadn't shown up, but the kids had seemed to be getting restless, so Harry had gotten started. If worst came to worst, he could always do his first few tricks again when she arrived. So he had sent Hedwig up to perch on the edge of the house's roof and started in on his limited routine. Glancing around theatrically, Harry suddenly jerked and pointed off to his right, drawing the kids' attention that way. There he was. Did you see him? When the kids invariably answered in the negative, Harry kept moving his eyes, acting as though he was following the movements of the ghost. Finally, after a few more attempts at pointing out the faux spirit, Harry continued with his trick. Grunting to himself, Harry lightly smacked his own forehead. Oh, that's right, I'm the only one who can see him like this. I keep forgetting. He shook his head sorrowfully before perking up. But I think I know a way to help you guys see what he can do. You see, this ghost follows me around because he likes my magic, but what he really likes is to help me in my tricks. While the children stared attentively, Harry reached into his pocket and pulled out a $50 coin. Holding the in his left hand, Harry began tracking the ghost with his eyes again. Alright, now I just need to, moving swiftly and making a few of the kids jump, Harry snapped his right arm out, pinching at the air. Catch him. And then, Harry moved his pinched fingers to the coin in his other hand and pressed them into the metal. Put him in the coin. And now that he's in the coin, Harry continued, idly pressing the $50 more firmly into his palm and pinching it there with the ball of his hand. Moving quickly before he lost his palming grip on the coin, Harry moved his right hand back and snapped his finger sharply, at the same time increasing the pressure on one edge of the coin until it slipped out and jumped away from his hand and into the other one. All he wants to do is play around. The kids and Michael let out various sounds of amazement and cheer as Harry repeated his trick several times, pressing the coin into his left palm and then letting the ghost jump it to his other hand when he snapped. This trick had been fairly easy for him to do, though he couldn't manage more than a foot or so in vertical height. All the same, it was more than enough to entertain the kids before him. He wrapped up his trick by releasing the ghost and putting his coin away. Then, just as he was about to start another, he was interrupted by the beeping of his communicator. Moving to clasp his right hand over his watch to muffle any further noise, Harry quickly turned to Michael. Hey, I think I may need a quick intermission. Bathroom break, you know? Michael didn't react at first, just staring blankly at Harry, but he was soon jumping up from his seat next to the kids and starting toward the house. Sure. Come on, I'll show you the way. Upon reaching the house, Michael seemed to struggle a bit with the door before it opened and he led him in and, after a bit further hesitation on his part, to an open bathroom door. Here it is. I'll just meet you back outside then, yeah? Harry nodded, a polite smile on his face. Sure thing. I shouldn't be too long. When Michael had left, Harry slipped into the bathroom and closed the door behind him. Quickly casting a wandless silencing charm on the door, Harry activated his communicator. Harry here, what's going on? Harry, Jason's voice came through sounding somewhat panicked. Golder and Scorpina are attacking the city and we can't get a hold of Tommy. We're outnumbered in the Megazord. We need help. Harry cursed inwardly. Of all the times for an attack to come. And after 2 weeks of silence too. I can't get away right now, Jason, it would be way too suspicious. Thinking quickly, Harry came to a decision. But I might be able to send Hedwig in to help you guys out anyway. I should be able to let her grow into her Zord form even without me being morphed as long as I give her enough grid power. She might not be as effective as if I were there too, but we'll take anything to help out at this point. Thanks, Harry. Jason said evenly, even as Harry heard the other rangers making various noises in the background, presumably reacting to another attack from Golder or Scorpina. Not a problem. I'll send Hedwig on her way and try to wrap things up here as quickly as I can so I can join you guys. Alright, Harry, just hurry. And with that, the communicator deactivated. Frowning slightly, Harry reached out to Hedwig mentally. Did you get that, Hedwig? The others need your help. Hedwig sent a mental sigh before responding. I heard, Harry/Wizard, and I will go and help our friends, but you must be careful. I still do not like the feel of these not people. Harry's frown only deepened. You mean you're getting the same feeling from the kids too? I am, Harry/Wizard. They stopped moving as much as soon as you went inside, but the adult not person is staring at me now. Well, that was certainly strange. What was going on here? Shaking himself, Harry drew on the grid's power and passed it along to his familiar. Alright, Hedwig. You go on ahead. I may have to feign illness or something and get out of here sooner rather than later. Harry almost felt Hedwig's relief as she spoke. Good. I shall go on and assist our friends with the yellow-plated monkey and bug lady. Join us as soon as you can. Harry nodded before removing the silencing charm and flushing the toilet for effect. He ran the sink for a bit before turning it off again and making his way back out of the house and to the door. Just before he got there, Michael appeared in the still open doorway looking slightly panicked. Harry, he said, sounding surprised and worried. Your bird just flew off, Mon. Harry gave him a reassuring smile and nodded. Yeah, she's probably just hunting or something. She'll find her way back later on. She always does. Though I guess it's a good thing that the kids have liked the magic so far since my backup plan just took off. Harry's comment seemed to calm the man a bit and he gestured for Harry to precede him out the door. Raising an eyebrow, Harry followed the man's lead, hearing the door close behind him as Michael followed him out. Feeling unusually paranoid now, Harry moved over to the table where his supplies were set out only for his eyes to snag on the children beyond it. The children who were standing in 2 even rows of 4 and staring blankly at him. The children who seemed to be twitching every so often, tilting their heads this way and that as if examining him. The children that, in a sudden flash of light, turned into a group of 8 3-foot-tall putty patrollers. SHT. Harry cursed, taking a fighting stance while his mind raced on how he would deal with the 8-pint-sized putties on his own while still protecting Michael as necessary. You're really not too smart of a power ranga, are you, Mon? Then Harry felt a strong blow to the back of his head and his world went dark. Harry came to with a groan, immediately lifting a hand to the back of his head in an attempt to soothe the pain he felt there. Awake at last, Magling? Harry's eyes went wide when Golder's voice registered through his pain and grogginess. Looking around himself quickly, Harry vaguely recognized the foggy ground and green columns with gold bars of Rita's dark dimension prison. Harry blinked as the dots connected for him and he forced himself to his feet with a growl. So it was a trap then? Harry asked rhetorically. Also you guys could catch me? I have to say, I'm flattered, Golder. The armored simian smirked at Harry as he paced nearby. The reason behind your capture will become clear all too soon, Magling. Suffice to say that my Empress has great plans for you. Oh yeah? Harry asked, reaching around and into his back pocket for his power coin. And what makes you think that I'll just come along quietly? When his searching hand came up empty, Harry's heart sank slightly. When Golder opened his own clenched fist to reveal Harry's coin, it was overtaken by dread. Looking for this, Magling? I assure you that you have little other choice than to come along quietly. Harry merely scowled, a reaction that only seemed to amuse the armored monster. What, nothing to say? Golder mocked him as he stepped closer, his fist once more closing around the coin to prevent Harry from snatching it. Where are your taunts and cocky attitude now, Magling? Golder then launched a punch into Harry's stomach. The blow was nowhere near the monster's full strength, but it was more than enough to drop the unprepared ranger to his knees. Golder laughed over Harry's wheezing as he struggled back to his feet, determined to show as little weakness as possible. Your only hope of survival now, Magling, is to do exactly as my Empress commands. Nearly hating himself for the necessity, Harry asked the obvious question. And what, precisely, might that be? Golder's superior smirk overtook his whole face. Come along and find out, Magling. Golder reached behind his back with the hand not holding Harry's coin captive and retrieved a familiar-looking orb that he then held out toward Harry. It was the same, or at least a similar-looking, device that Harry had seen Golder use to travel to and from the dark dimension when he had been here to rescue Jason more than 3 months before. Knowing what Golder wanted and refusing to give the simian the opportunity to order it, Harry reached out and touched the orb and soon after was enveloped in a flash of green light. From the control room off of the dark dimension, Golder led Harry, escorted by a few putties regular-sized ones this time, back along the hallway he vaguely remembered and out onto the balcony area with Rita's telescope. There the two found Rita waiting, pacing back and forth with her scepter making a soft clinking noise every other step. Harry's eyes were invariably drawn to the Elder Wand, still fused with the orb of her staff with the tip piercing through the outer ring. He had seen it several times since he arrived in this dimension and it was stolen, but each time he had been unable to retrieve it. But there was always the potential, no matter how slim, that he could retrieve it now. What better opportunity than when he had been taken to the heart of her fortress after all? The trick would be getting a hold of it and still being able to escape, which would call for ensuring a method of escape in the first place. Harry's plotting was interrupted when Rita began speaking as she walked down the few steps from the balcony railing. Welcome to my palace once again, Magling, although this time by invitation. Harry rolled his eyes. Oh yeah, lovely place you have here, Rita. The service needs some work though. Not a very polite manner. He idly jerked his thumb over his shoulder to where Golder was standing sentry by the door. Rita's smile didn't falter. Charming as always, I must say that I was unsure of the twin man's ability to carry out my plan, but results speak for themselves, wouldn't you say? At first, Harry thought she had still been talking to him, but when a familiar accented voice called out from a shadowed corner of the room he discovered otherwise. Of course, my empress. I live but to serve you. Michael? Harry asked, confusion in his expression. But what's going on here? Michael smirked before his form blurred slightly and then let out a burst of light that left Harry blinking away spots. When his vision cleared, the dark-skinned man was replaced by a humanoid monster that appeared to be made of metal or glass. Its shape was largely that of a human, but with a pair of large pauldrons extending over its shoulders and a pointed head with what looked like a very tall, pointed shirt collar coming up around it. It had no real face to speak of, only a pair of red eyes and a vaguely nose-like protrusion set into a blank, expressionless plane. I'm afraid you fell for my illusion, Magi Ranger. I am the Twin Man and I can take on the form of anything I choose. Rita's cackling laughter brought Harry's attention back to her. Yes, the Twin Man is one of my most powerful monsters ever. I have big plans for his powers of duplication, but you have much more important things to be concerned with now. Which brings me to the entire point behind my bringing you here. You see, Magling, ever since we fought on that rooftop before you Rangers stole my Green Ranger from me, I have been studying your magic. Rita returned to her pacing as she spoke, seemingly oblivious to all else. Initially, it was in an effort to learn how you were able to redirect and overpower my own spells, but when I found what I believed to be the reason, it opened up an entirely new avenue. Rita turned to face him fully, a wicked gleam in her eye as his lips stretched into a smile. Because of the lovely wand I acquired from you, I can use your form of magic as well. Harry's eyes widened involuntarily at her statement. It was true that he had only survived their rooftop encounter because of the hint of the Elder Wand's magic within her own spells, but how did that equate to her being able to use his brand of magic? Seeing his reaction, Rita's evil smile changed to a cocky smirk before she continued. Of course it isn't as simple as all that. While you have been puttering about with Zordon and his teachings, learning to access the grid and the power, I have found a way to channel my own power in such a way as to mimic the signature of your natural magic. With this at my disposal, I believe that I will be able to utilize your own brand of highly versatile spells. Her look changed once more, this time to one of eager anticipation. With your magic at my disposal, I will be completely unstoppable. Nothing in the entire galaxy will be able to stand against my might. Rita froze for a moment, arms raised in celebration and her eyes closed, most likely envisioning her perceived future. Then, after a bit, she relaxed again, her eyes meeting Harry's once more. Which brings me to your purpose here. You will teach me all you know about your magic and how to use it. Harry blinked once and then again as he processed Rita's demand. I'm gonna go with a no on that one. Rita's face, as opposed to the fury he was expecting, shifted to a sort of smug superiority. I had anticipated that response, young wizard, and so I took precautions. Golder. Yes, your evilness, Golder's voice rumbled out before Harry found himself restrained by a putty on each arm. Before he could react, He felt Golder's presence just before something was slipped around his neck from behind and locked in place with an audible click. The two putties released him almost immediately and Harry's hands lifted to the new object around his throat. His fingers had barely brushed it when he felt a pulse of magic from it that was immediately followed by the most intensely painful sensation he had ever felt. Harry dropped to the ground, writhing in pain as he screamed. This was worse than Voldemort's cruciatus curse. The moment seemed to stretch on into eternity until finally, blessedly, the pain stopped and Harry found himself rolled over onto his back by a kick from a smirking Golder with Rita standing nearby. What you are now wearing, Maggling, is known as a subservience collar. Rita explained with a smirk of her own. It is a wonderful tool created by dark magics that is used to, let's say, ensure the cooperation of those who might be less than willing. Great, Harry mumbled, still regaining his wits after feeling the collar's effects. Rita continued on, either ignoring or ignorant of his comment. So this is the situation you now find yourself in. You will teach me your brand of magic. Every time you refuse, you will be punished by the collar. This is a completely autonomous function. It activates every time you refuse a command from the one it is attuned to, in this case, me. Rita's smirk was going full force now, her confidence in the superiority of her position clearly visible in her expression. It was a confidence that Harry currently felt unable to dispute. With a nod from Rita, the two putties from before stepped forward and heaved Harry to his feet. I shall give you some time to ponder your new reality, Maggling, and to put together your lesson plans, of course. I expect you to give me your best efforts. Your very life depends on it after all. Harry, his mind racing, voiced the first thought that came to him. And what if you're wrong? What if you can't really mimic my spells and there's nothing I can teach you? Rita's smirk remained unchanged as she signaled for the putties to release Harry again, letting him stand on slightly unsteady legs. I see I shall have to offer you proof then. I have been watching you, Maggling, and I picked up a few spells just from that. Observe. Rita turned to face her oversized telescope sitting near the edge of her balcony. While Harry watched, equal parts horrified and intrigued, Rita jabbed her scepter so that the tip of the Elder Wand pointed directly toward the telescope and released a tremendous burst of power. Power that felt distinctly magical as Harry first knew it. Wingardium Leviosa. Harry's horror overtook his interest as he watched the telescope shudder once, twice, 3 times, before finally lifting unsteadily off the ground a few inches and hovering there. So there it was. Rita's spell was disgustingly overpowered, probably because she lacked the knowledge to make it work properly without that, but she was capable of using wizarding magic. And Harry was being forced to teach her all he knew. Harry's first evening of captivity set the stage for the rest of his time in Rita's palace. Rita had taken possession of his power coin from Golder and led the procession of herself, Harry, Golder, and a half-dozen putties through the corridors of her lunar palace to a room that she told him would be his quarters and classroom all in one. The room itself was similar in size to the command center's main room, standing nearly 30 feet on each wall with the ceiling around 10 feet high. As far as features, there really were none. The walls, floor and ceiling of the room were all solid, unmarked stone. Leading the group to a shadowed corner, Rita gestured to a stone slab sticking out of the wall that Harry hadn't immediately noticed and indicated that that was where he would be sleeping. Seeing the wicked grin on Golder's face accompanied by the smug superiority on Rita's, Harry walked over to the slab and waved his hand briefly, casting a cushioning charm and leaving his fingers feeling a bit feathery before lying down. Surprisingly comfortable. Golder's scowl and Rita's triumphant look were the first sign that Harry had goofed already. I had suspected that you were capable of fossilis magic beyond your combat spells, Maggling, though it has been so long since I've seen you use it that I wasn't too sure. Still, since you were so kind as to reveal this skill. Harry cursed inwardly as he slowly sat up, watching the contemplative villain uneasily. Finally, after a few more seconds, Rita nodded to herself decisively and focused on him again. Listen well, Maggling. If you wish to avoid feeling the effects of the collar again, these are the commands that you will have to follow. First, you will not use fossilis magic again unless absolutely required for the purposes of teaching me your magic. Second, anytime you come into possession of your power coin, you will not morph or use it against anyone in my palace, again unless necessary for teaching me your magic. Third, you will not leave this room without an SCRT. Fourth, you will not leave the palace under any circumstances unless told otherwise by myself. Fifth, you will answer any and all questions I ask you about your magic when I ask them and will teach me your brand of magic to the best of your ability. Any questions? Harry winced as Rita lay out the terms of his capture. With the collar on, he wouldn't be able to go against her commands without setting it off, and with her forbidding his wandless magic he didn't see any obvious route to getting rid of the collar. Still, she had all but admitted that he'd find himself in possession of his power coin again, so perhaps there was a chance. He was torn out of his thoughts by Golder yanking him up from his seated position and shaking him in midair. "The Empress asked you a question, Mageling." Harry just stared at Golder blankly for a moment before shaking his head. Ignoring the armored monkey still holding him up, he turned his head toward Rita. "No, I think everything seems fairly clear." Rita nodded sharply before turning to leave. "Very well then, Mageling. We shall leave you to begin putting together your lesson plans. I shall see you again tomorrow. Come, Golder." Rita completed her exit with a cackle that managed to make the hairs on the back of Harry's neck stand up. Golder brought Harry slightly closer to his face, glaring to his eyes. "Know this, Mageling. My Empress may have a use for you for now, but that won't last forever. And when your usefulness runs out, I will be the first in line to remove your head. You're welcome to try, Golder." Harry shot back, resorting to taunting for lack of another option. "Merlin knows you've been doing so ever since we first met anyway." Golder growled and seemed about to speak when Rita's voice rang through the room from the doorway. "Golder." The simian seemed to flinch slightly before growling and unceremoniously dropping Harry and smirking as the wizard fell to the ground. Without another comment, the monster turned and marched out of the room, disappearing into the shadowed hallway beyond. Harry clambered back to his feet, his mind racing. There wasn't an actual door to be closed, so his first instinct was to try and leave. Moving swiftly and as silently as he could, Harry made his way to the doorway, waiting several more seconds just to make sure that Golder was actually out of sight, before easing forward. The instant that his foot slid across the threshold, he felt a tiny pulse of magic from the collar before he was once again consumed by unimaginable, nerve-burning pain. Luckily enough, when he collapsed to the floor, his foot was drawn back into the room as he instinctively curled into the fetal position and the pain stopped instantly. After a minute or two of panting and cringing at phantom remnants of the pain, Harry sighed. "Right," he mumbled. "Don't leave the room. DMN it." Harry had been so focused on not being allowed to use his wandless magic that he hadn't even fully processed the rest of Rita's dictates. Once more returning to his feet, though with a slight groan this time from the residual pain, Harry staggered to the stone slab that was to be his bed and laid back. He needed a plan, but found himself unable to come up with anything solid. Eventually, the physical exhaustion brought on by the recent torture from the collar, plus mental exhaustion from the rest of his day, led to Harry drifting to sleep. "Wake up, Mageling." Rita's none-too-pleasant voice ripped Harry from his rest, making him nearly bolt from his bed and into a fighting stance, his hands brought up in preparation to cast or punch, whichever was more appropriate. It took several moments before Rita's smug visage registered to him and he had to fight down the instinct to follow through on his attack as the memory of his current situation reasserted itself. Straightening himself up, Harry fought to refrain from voicing any attitude and answered her as calmly as he could manage. "Rita, what can I do for you?" Rita's expression remained unchanged as she responded. "I'm here for my first lesson, Mageling." Harry's sudden wide-eyed expression certainly had an impact as Rita began scowling. "You are prepared for our first lesson, aren't you?" Harry still didn't respond, his mind switching back and forth between trying to think up something to teach her and, oh boy, this is gonna hurt. Rita's scowl changed to a thoughtful look for a moment before she smiled again. "Ah, I see. I failed to directly order you to prepare for today before I left last night. A mistake I shall not make again, I assure you." She glared at him momentarily before changing back to a neutral look as she began pacing nearby. "Very well, instead, why don't you tell me about your magic? What will you be showing me how to do?" Rita, Harry noted, seemed to take a great deal of pleasure in implying that he was teaching her willingly. It was not an ineffective psychological tactic, he mused, but it was really more annoying than anything else. He wasn't happy about this situation, though that went without saying, but he also knew that until he managed to come up with some kind of plan, really anything at this point, he was stuck working within Rita's constraints. That meant keeping her appeased as long as possible. But could he really manage that without teaching her anything truly dangerous? Knowing that he had to respond lest she do something to activate the subservience collar again, or have it activate on its own for his failure to answer at all, Harry took a breath and began speaking. "In my world, young magicals began attending a school of magic at the age of 11. Some students were raised in a magical environment beforehand and so knew about magic already, but I was among the group that did not. The school I went to, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, offered a 7-year program where we were taught about the different disciplines of magic and the most common spells and techniques within each of those disciplines." Rita now began looking interested, so Harry pressed on. "The core subjects taught at Hogwarts were transfiguration, charms, defense against the dark arts, potions, history of magic, herbology, and astronomy. Starting in our third year, we were given the opportunity to take elective courses. These were ancient runes, arithmancy, divination, care of magical creatures, and muggle studies. Of these subjects, some of them are outside my ability to teach. The sorceress cut him off. Why is that? If you're refusing to teach me something you know, remember that the collar will activate. Harry did his best to fight down his flinch at the mention of the collar, but the amusement on Rita's face led him to believe that he was less than successful. Still, he was a bit more awake now and his mind was racing to find a way to explain the subjects, but still get him out of teaching her too much that was useful. I never took any classes on ancient runes, arithmancy, or muggle studies during my time at school. Rita took another thoughtful look before speaking. And after you left school? Do not lie to me. Harry cursed internally before doing his best to deflect. I learned a bit about runes, but nothing that is immediately useful. In truth, most of what he had been taught by Moody and the Order, how to make his expanded room in the command center and the basics behind his patchwork wand among other things, would be immensely useful to Rita, just not necessarily immediately. When the collar failed to react to his lack of elaboration, he let himself breathe a bit easier. It seemed the key was to tell only part of the truth, lying only by omission as it were. He just hoped that the witch didn't think to dig deeper into the present subject. Arithmancy is a form of magical mathematics that is used to break down the fundamentals of a spell. I suppose it could be described as a way to quantify magic as I know it, but as I never even attempted to study it I really don't know for sure. As for Muggle studies, it was the wizarding point of view on non-magical life. The class was tremendously out of date and I could have probably taught the class myself just based on what I knew from being raised in the non-magical world. For her part, Rita merely hummed thoughtfully before shaking her head dismissively and tapping her scepter on the stone floor. What of the other disciplines at your school? How might they be useful? Herbology, potions, and care of magical creatures focused on the native plants and animals of my world and their magical properties and effects. Without those plants and animals, any information I could give you on those would be useless. History of magic was about the past of my wizarding society, again not much practical use there. Astronomy, aside from teaching us constellations and the like, dealt with how the stars and their alignment affect the other magical disciplines, but most of these effects are outside the realm of active spellcasting, having more effect on herbology and creatures than the others. Divination as I know it is only usable by those who have an innate gift for the subject and so I can't really relate much of that to you either. When Harry stopped talking, Rita merely waited. Her patience, however, only lasted a handful of seconds before she snapped. And the others? Harry continued without emotion. Transfiguration is the magical art of changing one thing into another thing, either animate or inanimate. It is also one of the most dangerous and difficult classes we had. Defense against the dark arts dealt with protecting ourselves against magical threats, up to and including other magicals. This class is where we were taught most of the low-level combat spells that I know. Charms covers almost all other expressed magic not included in the other two subjects. It involves spells to change appearance, motion, behavior, and several other general-purpose spells. Most of the versatility in my magic comes from charms. Rita's face split into her gruesome smile again. Ah, then that is where we shall start, with those last three disciplines. Take the rest of today to decide on the best way to teach me these spells and prepare accordingly. Make sure you do it properly as well. I will not suffer you wasting my time in a futile hope of giving the rest of those pathetic power BRTS a chance to rescue you. Rita paused for a moment before reaching into her voluminous robes and pulling out Harry's power coin. I will return this to you so that you can properly prepare this room. Remember my rules, Maggling. I would hate for the collar to torture you into insanity before I had a chance to learn from you. And then she left, cackling to herself the whole way. Harry spent his first hour or so pondering his situation. It wasn't until he felt the slightest burst of pain from the collar that he realized that he was breaking one of Rita's commands. She had ordered that he spend the day preparing to teach her what he knew, and pondering his situation was not a part of that. The collar took orders very literally, but that was something he could use. He had already discovered that he could simply leave out bits of information, so long as Rita didn't press for more detail. That could end up being his biggest asset. He might be able to lead her into making a mistake with a spell that would have less than pleasant results for herself and give him an opportunity at the same time. Another pulse from the collar put that thought to rest. After another moment of pondering, he realized that he had also been ordered to teach her properly, which meant no intentional misleading. Oh well, he could work with that too. Harry smirked as he shifted his coin into wand form and began whipping it around, conjuring and transfiguring what he felt he would need to properly teach Rita, his plans growing in his mind with each wave of his wand. Please have a seat, Miss Repulsa. Harry intoned from his position behind a heavy wooden desk opposite the door. He had portioned off the large room he was given into two smaller ones. The one the doorway opened into had been changed into an approximation of a Hogwarts classroom, teacher's desk and a number of student desks included. While the room was a bit on the smaller size given the room he had had to work with, it was still more than adequate for a class of one. What's going on here, Maggling? Golder growled as he followed Rita into the room. The witch herself looked equal parts confused and amused as she looked around the room, taking in the blackboard on the wall and the assorted banners and decorations around the room featuring 4 different earth animals. Harry met Golder's eyes evenly. I was ordered to find the best way to teach my magical skills, and I came to the conclusion that the best way I could do so was the way I was taught in the first place. Harry was doing his best to channel the ever-proper Professor McGonagall. He had originally considered acting like Snape, but ultimately decided that, aside from the fact that he considered the man to be one of the worst teachers he had ever had and thus his lessons and teaching style weren't proper, Rita would end up reacting poorly to being called a dunderhead repeatedly. So to avoid retribution from both the subservient scholar and his captors, he felt it was better to choose another model to work from. Golder seemed about to respond when Rita idly raised a hand, signaling for quiet. We'll let the human play his little game, Golder. The caller isn't reacting, so he still intends to teach properly. If he wants a little stage play to make himself feel better, then I'll allow it. Harry inwardly seethed at Rita's smug comment, but remained outwardly calm. His plan was to stall for as much time as he could. In the right hands, even the simplest of spells could be dangerous to the unprepared, so he had to avoid teaching Rita as much as he could. So long as he made sure to properly teach what he actually was forced to, the caller shouldn't react. It was time to see if his first ploy would work out. Once Rita had situated herself in one of the desks, having to tuck her voluminous robes around her to fit, and Golder had moved to stand in a back corner, Harry walked around his desk to stand before her. I felt it would be best to start with the spell you have already demonstrated and make sure you can cast it correctly. I already know how to use the floating spell. Move on to something else. Rita snapped, looking insulted at his comment about correct casting and her lack thereof. I beg to differ. Harry said simply before gesturing to a small table to one side of the room with a single feather resting atop it. When I was taught the levitation charm, he emphasized the proper name for the spell, making Rita grind her teeth in further frustration. We used feathers, most likely to prevent us from hurting anyone if we lost control of the spell. Harry flicked his wand, silently summoning the feather to his hand and turning to place it on his desk before moving to one side. Observe. Wingardium Leviosa. Harry kept his wand pointed straight at the feather the entire time and made sure to cast the spell as quietly as he could without being completely silent, hoping that Rita couldn't clearly hear the incantation. When he then began to raise his wand tip upward, the feather rose steadily off the table and up into the air, always going exactly where Harry pointed his wand to. After a lap around the room, Harry directed the feather back down to his desk where it landed softly. Now, if you would demonstrate your technique, Miss Repulsa? Harry gestured with his left hand toward the feather while subtly tapping his wand on the desk with his right, activating the inlaid sticking charm on the desk to hold the feather in place and, just in case, to hold the desk to the floor. It was misdirection at its finest and arguably one of the most useful things he had learned from his stage magic books. Rita slid out of the desk seat with a growl before jabbing her scepter at an odd angle to get the elder wand pointing toward the feather. Wingardium Leviosa. Just as before, Harry noted the absolutely obscene amounts of magic she was wasting in her attempts to make the simple spell work. He was forced to hide a smile though as the feather didn't even twitch. After nearly a minute, Rita cut her spell and rounded on Harry in frustration. What did you do? Why didn't my spell work? Here was the most delicate part of his entire plan. I did nothing to the feather other than conjure it, but I think the root of this problem lies in that very fact. Since I conjured it from nothing, it is made entirely of my own magic. Because of that, and the fact that we aren't exactly the best of friends, the magic in the feather actively resists your own attempts to cast on it. When you combine that with your absolutely horrendous technique. Rita stomped right up to Harry and glared at him nose to nose. Do not taunt me, Maggling. There is nothing wrong with my spellcasting technique. I have been using magic since before you were even born. Harry fought down the urge to swallow in nervousness. While that may be true, you haven't been using my kind of magic. There are different techniques that must be used if one is to get the proper results. Techniques that you don't know as of yet. Then why didn't you show me these techniques in the first place? Because I knew that you wouldn't believe me, so I felt a proper demonstration was called for. It was a tactic used by one of my teachers when the students thought they knew better than them. In truth, Moody had used such tactics on Ron when he had started to slack off on his training. He felt that he had learned all Moody had to teach him and that he didn't need to stay in practice to stay effective. The Mad Auror had taken to ambushing Ron at all hours of the day while they were at Grimmauld Place until Ron had ultimate admitted defeat and started taking things seriously again. It was a tentative connection at best, but it seemed to be enough for the collar to not call him out on it in a most painful fashion. Rita merely growled. "You're holding information back from me. You aren't teaching me properly." Harry raised one eyebrow, his face remaining as blank as he could manage. "The fact that I'm not writhing in pain at the moment suggests otherwise." Rita's scowl deepened before she stomped back to the desk she had claimed. "And what of the problems with the feather? How do you propose we deal with that?" Harry shrugged. "We, or rather you I imagine, will simply have to obtain some actual feathers from somewhere. They cannot have been directly influenced by magic of any kind to enable the best results." Rita growled again before raising her voice. "Squat! Babu!" Her shout echoed painfully in the room and Harry found himself unable to resist a wince of pain. Mere moments later, the two bumbling monsters came rushing into the classroom, not quite stopping fast enough to avoid crashing into the backmost desks and ending up in a heap on the floor. "Yes, your evilness, Babu from underneath Squat's bulk." Rita paid no attention to their predicament. "Go down to earth and find me some feathers." She turned back to Harry and raised an eyebrow. The larger the better, though not too obscenely large. Less than a foot in length as possible. The two minions exchanged a glance as they struggled back to their feet before nodding to Rita simultaneously. "Of course, Rita. We'll get you the featheriest feathers on the whole planet." Squat nearly cheered before leading the charge back out of the room. Harry did his best to ignore the two, merely waving his wand to repair the destroyed desks once they were out of sight. In the future, maggling, Rita turned back to face Harry fully. "You will inform me of any materials required before our lessons so that they can be acquired ahead of time." Harry suppressed a smirk as he moved behind his desk again, idly tapping it with his wand to dispel the sticking charm before opening a drawer and removing a sheet of conjured parchment. He came back around the desk again and passed the parchment to Rita. "I have already taken the liberty of making a list. The items on here should be enough for our first several lessons. Once we need more, usually for transfiguration, I'll have another list." He had hoped to use the same "we need materials" gimmick to stall for as much time as possible, but his logical side had pointed out that Rita probably wouldn't stand for that more than once, so he had prepared the list as a contingency. Frankly, at this point, he was just glad that his ruse to obtain the materials he felt he needed didn't count against him for whatever spells drove the collar. His sabotage of the feather could have ruined the entire plan if it hadn't worked out. Though it probably helped that his excuse about conjuring the feather had been true, if somewhat misleading, as it would take more magic than what was in the feather to directly interfere with Rita's. Nodding once and tucking the parchment into her robes after glancing over it only briefly, the witch once more turned her full attention back to her unwilling tutor. "Now," she said, sliding slowly back into her desk with much tucking and pulling on her robes. "Tell me of these spellcasting techniques." The next hour was spent going over the basics of wizarding spellcasting. He spoke of wand movements and proper pronunciation mostly, with overall less time spent on intent and magical power since he knew Rita wouldn't have as much trouble with that and likely wouldn't care for him wasting time rehashing things she already knew. When he mentioned the specific requirements of the levitation charm, Rita had demanded to know why he hadn't gone through any of the techniques for his demonstration. Harry was, thankfully, prepared for this as well. "You're comparing yourself to someone with 9 years' experience with these types of spells. The techniques I'm explaining are for the most basic of witches and wizards, typically the 11-year-olds. While you are superior to most first-ties in some cases, particularly in your power, in other ways, you're no better off than the Muggleborns right off the train in their first classes. You know nothing of this brand of magic besides what you've convinced yourself of, incorrectly I might add. Once you become more skilled with the spells, you can drop parts of it, typically the verbal incantation and parts of the wand movement. For a spell as simple as the levitation charm, a knowledgeable wizard doesn't need any of the techniques. Trying to avoid using them, or doing so out of ignorance as you did, means that there must be a compensation of some sort from one of the other requirements. In your case, you used far too much magic to make such a simple spell work and even then got subpar results." Rita had looked furious for a moment, and Golder had seemed more than a bit disappointed when Harry hadn't dropped to the ground under the collar's influence, but they had both calmed down after a few moments. Nothing Harry had said was a lie, and it was mixed with just enough scorn as per McGonagall at her most affronted that it qualified as proper teaching too. Once they had settled that, he moved on to the specifics of wand movements. He anticipated this to be one of the more difficult aspects for Rita, seeing as the wand she was using was mounted at an angle at the top of a scepter as long as she was tall. This would make the assorted twists, flicks, and swishes a bit more difficult to perform. He had a brief hope that Rita would remove the Elder Wand from her scepter to make things easier for herself. If she did so, Harry was confident that he would be able to summon it from her, as he would be casting magic on the wand and not on her, which was forbidden by her command. If he was able to do so and then deal with the collar with the Elder Wand before it could activate, he would be able to show her exactly what his magic could do with a wand made exclusively for that type of magic. His hopes were dashed, however, as Rita's stubbornness led to her finding the exact way she needed to hold her staff and move it to get the necessary wand movements. Some of them were incredibly awkward and far from practical, particularly swishes and twists, but she had taken Harry's words to heart that she would be able to do without after some practice. Harry just took solace in the fact that her adjusted wand movements took much longer than they should and made her look ridiculous. When Harry was at least passably satisfied with her wand movements, they moved on to the incantation portion of her problem. In this case, he channeled his best Hermione. Your problem here is that you're saying it almost completely wrong. It's Wingardium Leviosa. Make sure you pay attention to the Leviosa. It's not Leviosa. And make the gar nice and long too. Rita was not pleased. Finally, after another hour or so of drilling the frustrated witch on the basics of one of the most basic of all charms, Squat and Babu returned, each carrying and dropping with each step an armful of colorful feathers. Here they are, your evilness, Babu announced just before tripping over the desks once again, although this time it was because at least some of his vision was blocked by the feathers. Yeah, we got a bunch. Squat followed him in before, predictably, tripping over the prone Babu and smashing him into the floor again. Harry found himself comparing the two to Bulk and Skull in his head. Both groups certainly had their fair share of fumbles and falls. With the feathers now present, and once the two minions were sent away again, Harry set to teaching Rita how to properly levitate a feather. It was a long process that caused no small amount of frustration on the witch's part as she worked to refine her adjusted wand movements to allow for the spell to work without expending grotesque amounts of power in the process. By the time she was able to consistently levitate the feather, the two had been working on that one project for 5 hours and both were more than ready for a break. I shall return again tomorrow, Maggling, Rita said gruffly. She had been rather frustrated with the slow pace of her lesson that day and had more than made that apparent with her complaints each time the levitation charm failed to work. In the meantime, you will return your power coin to me. Harry once more fought down a wince. He had hoped to be able to keep his wand with him, but he knew it had been a long shot at best. Thinking quickly, Harry placed the wand between his two palms and applied a bit of magic as he pressed inward, making the wand glow and compress as it returned to its coin form. If he had to hand it over, there was no way he was doing so in a form that Rita might be able to actually use. There's no telling if his coin wand, being made to use both his magic and the power, would work better for her than the Elder Wand did, but he definitely didn't want to find out. Taking the coin from Harry, Rita turned and walked out of the room. Until tomorrow, Maggling. I certainly hope you have our next lesson planned by then. Harry let out a sigh of relief before a flash of movement made him realize that Golder hadn't left the room yet. He turned to face the monster only for pain to overtake him as Golder drove his right fist into Harry's stomach. I think you'll find that playing games isn't wise, Maggling. Golder let Harry fall to his knees, clutching his undoubtedly bruised midsection as he doubled over with a gasp. You may have found a way to work around the subservience collar, but sooner or later my Empress will learn what she wants from you. And then I shall have the great pleasure of disposing of you myself. Having said his piece, Golder turned and stomped out of the classroom, leaving Harry lying on the floor and struggling to catch his breath. The next day, after a fitful night of sleep, Harry decided to do a quick review of the levitation charm, hoping that the time that had passed might result in enough backslide to call for more practice and therefore more time killed. Unfortunately, Rita managed the spell properly her first time and Harry was forced to move on to his next intended subject. His next hope was that by doing a different subject each day and only teaching a single lesson or spell each day, he could buy still more time with reviewing and rehashing the same topics over and over. If her difficulties with the levitation charm held true, then he might even be able to get away with it without her forcing him to move on to another spell after she figured out his first choice. He had to teach each individual lesson as well as he could to try and impart the knowledge to the evil witch, but that didn't mean he had to do it in a way that was necessarily easy for her to learn. And so it was that the two, with a golden armored sentry, set about Rita's second lesson in wizarding magic. No. This is ridiculous. Why would I want to learn something like this? How is this even remotely useful? Look, Rita, you wanted me to teach you these things, and the only way I know to do that is the way I was taught back in school. I don't want to learn this. I want to learn spells that will help me spread chaos and destruction all over the galaxy. This does me no good at all. Alright, Rita, let's try it your way then. How about an exploding curse? It's a 5th-year spell and is one of the few purely offensive spells I learned in my basic schooling. You've undoubtedly watched me use it before, yes? You cast it with a simple jab of your wand toward the target with a counterclockwise quarter twist in mid-motion. Like so. Bombarda. Harry said, careful to put the accent on the 3rd syllable in the incantation as opposed to the 2nd where it was supposed to go, while silently casting the spell properly in his mind so he got the right result despite his improper verbal incantation. Rita watched the spell arc across the room, striking a putty patroller that was standing next to the door, apparently as a guard. When the spell hit, the putty exploded into shrapnel and Rita's eyes danced with eagerness and excitement. When Harry gestured for Rita to try, he watched, somewhat amused, as Rita jabbed her scepter toward a second putty with the Elder Wand pointing the way. Because of the angle the wand was mounted in the scepter, Rita had to rotate her entire staff at an awkward angle to get the necessary rotation for the spell, but she managed all the same. When she attempted to cast the spell, using the same accent that Harry had verbalized, and nothing happened, she wheeled to face him with fury in her face. You must be teaching me wrong. Why didn't the spell work? Harry sighed as he repeated himself from the previous day. If I had been teaching you wrong, the collar would have dropped me to the ground, as you well know. The spell didn't work because you aren't ready for that level of magic yet. You have to start from the beginning, which is what I was trying to tell you in the first place. So, matches to needles, let's go. And today we'll get into some of what I learned in defense against the dark arts. Finally something useful in combat. Quite so, the tickling charm is cast thusly. Today, we'll be going over a spell I've had to use pretty much every time Squat and Babu come in here. That should provide an excellent opportunity for you to practice. The mending charm is really quite simple. Beetles to buttons. Today it's the Vermilius charm, a charm to summon red sparks. We'll do a bit of a 2-part lesson today. First up is Lumos, a spell for lighting up your wand tip. Coupled with that is Nox, which extinguishes this light. This spell is used to transfigure the target into a dragon dash. You mean a giant fire-breathing dragon? Finally a useful spell. Ah no. These dragons can't breathe fire or really fly either unless the target could fly already, that is, and they tend to be of similar size to the target as well and not really very bright on top of all of that anyway. The incantation is Draconifers. Now our data spell for today is Dash. I sincerely hope, Maggling, that we're going to do something different this time. Oh, of course we are, Miss Repulsa. Today, we'll be covering the Vermilius charm. Last time we made red sparks, this spell makes green sparks. Harry woke groggily atop the magically cushioned stone slab he had been sleeping on since his arrival at Rita's palace. Without really thinking about it, he blindly reached over the edge and along the floor until he found a short metal spike that he had transfigured as a demonstration for Rita and then pocketed early on during his captivity. Picking the spike up, Harry turned to face the wall and scratched a tally mark into the stone surface. 18 days. It had been 18 days since he had been captured and he was honestly running out of mostly useless spells to teach her. The best utility spell he had taught her so far had been the mending charm, and even that was grudgingly. He had mostly done so in the hopes that a slightly more complex charm, in this case due to the fact that the caster had to mentally define the affected area, would slow her down some, but no such luck. As far as combat-oriented spells, he had been forced to teach her the Jellylegs Jinx the day before and thus spend most of the class wobbling around wherever he went, having been commanded to leave her spell in effect until it wore off on its own. Needless to say, the amount of power Rita put behind her spells and the fact that she reapplied the spell as often as she could meant that Harry had spent most of the day sitting at his desk. Luckily enough, there were enough seemingly useless transfiguration lessons that actually built the caster's skill level up enough to deal with the more complicated magics that he still had plenty to choose from. It was this difference in potential lessons among the 3 disciplines that now had him cursing his initial decision to rotate through different subject as the days went by. If he were to change things up now, then Rita would surely comment on it, likely to his detriment. He had spent each evening after Rita's lessons and a pitiful meal delivered by putties locked in an occlumency trance, hoping to come up with the next day's lesson before the cursed caller decided he wasn't prepared as commanded and decided to punish him for it. Such an occasion had happened a few times, and when you combine that with the times Rita had ordered him not to do something mere moments before he did so and was thusly tortured by the caller, he was more than familiar with the effect of the object. As much as he hated to admit it, he had become somewhat afraid of the caller's effects. Never before had he been in such a position with his enemies. Heck, even Voldemort hadn't managed to capture him and have him so firmly under his control other than during his 4th year when the Dark Wizard was resurrected, and even then the man's own ego had allowed for Harry's escape before things got too bad. He was pulled out of his thoughts by Rita's grating voice, summoning him to the classroom. Harry blinked in surprise. Either Rita was early or he had slept in much later than usual. Rising from his bed, Harry idly patted himself down in a futile attempt to settle his wrinkled and filthy clothing. Perhaps he should adjust the day's lesson to a cleaning charm? That way at least he would be able to use himself as a demonstration and get back to feeling at least a bit more human. The instant Harry opened the door between his sleeping area and the classroom area, he found his vision overtaken by Goldor's armor. A heartbeat later, Goldor's arms lashed out, grabbing Harry by his upper arms and lifting him with negligent ease before carrying him over to one of the student desks and shoving him in. "It occurs to me," Maggling, Rita drawled from her perch on the teacher's desk, "that you haven't been teaching me what I want to know." Harry rallied himself as best he could before responding. "As I've pointed out more than once, Rita, if I wasn't teaching you properly, the collar would activate." Rita's face stretched into a sickening smile. "Oh, of that I have no doubt, Maggling. You're smarter than I gave you credit for though. You teach each spell properly, but you don't teach me anything especially useful to my goals." Harry's silence was all but the affirmation that Rita had been fishing for, but he found himself unable to deny her words, knowing what such a lie would do. Nodding firmly, Rita continued speaking. "Such defiance would normally result in a painful punishment, but I must admit that I admire your determination and resourcefulness. However, I hope you know that I will no longer give you the room needed for such tricks." Harry felt his heart sink as Rita's words registered, but before he could think on it, she continued. "The next questions I ask you will be answered immediately and without deep thought, or I will let the collar run free. Do you understand?" Harry paled immediately at her statement. Then he went even paler when his failure to immediately answer sparked a buildup of power from the subservience collar, a buildup that usually preceded pain for him. Finally, just as the pain sparked on his nerves, Harry managed to gasp out an answer. "Yes." Rita's sickening smile returned. "Good. Now, the existence of a defense against the dark arts class implies the existence of actual dark arts. Do you know anything of these dark arts?" Harry once more felt the buildup of power when he delayed speaking for more than a heartbeat. "Technically, I know of them, but dash. Yes or no will do, Maggling. Now, answer the question." "Yes." "Can you teach me these dark arts?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I wasn't taught to use dark magic, only to recognize and fight against it. Surely there are some spells classified as dark that you're aware of and that you would be able to instruct me on." As Rita trailed off, Harry's mind immediately went to 3 particular spells that he did indeed have NTMT knowledge of. Though he had only ever cast 2 of the 3, he knew that they were exactly the kind of spells that Rita was looking for. Unfortunately, he must have given some sign of his thought process on his face as Rita's own brightened with a wicked glee. "Ah, so I see you do have something you can teach me, Maggling. Tell me, what spells are you thinking about?" Harry grit his teeth even as he felt fearful anticipation build within him alongside the power growing in the collar. He knew that he couldn't tell Rita of the unforgivables. If she were to learn to use them, and there was no doubt in his mind that she would be able to, she would become several orders of magnitude more dangerous than she already was. Then the pain hit. Harry felt himself being held in place in the desk seat by Goldor and dimly recognized the sounds of the sadistic monster's laughter as he screamed out his agony. His body was lashed over and over by waves of pain caused by the magic of the subservience collar, but he still refused to answer Rita's question. After what seemed like an eternity, Rita did something that made the collar deactivate. Harry spent his first few blissful seconds trying to catch his breath, involuntary tears of relief streaming down his cheeks as he did so. "You are stronger than I had thought as well, Maggling." Rita spoke evenly, her anger clear in her tone. "But you will tell me what I want to know." Harry took a few more gasps of air before meeting her eyes. "You can try whatever you want, Rita. Do whatever you want to me, but you'll find yourself sorely disappointed in the end." Rita met his glare for a moment before looking past him toward the doorway, a smug grin breaking across her face. "I had hoped you would feel that way. Bring her in." Harry's heart, having been propped up by his own determination not to give in, fell once more as he recognized the voice of the person being brought into the room amid the sounds of a struggle. "Let me go, you clay-faced creeps." It was Trini. Harry managed to turn far enough in Goldor's iron grip to catch sight of his girlfriend, her clothing dirty and slightly torn and her face bearing a few bruises showing that she hadn't gone down without a fight, being dragged up to the front of the room by a pair of putty patrollers. "Harry," she shouted when her view was no longer blocked by Goldor's position behind him. "Harry, are you all right?" "Trini." Harry responded reflexively, only for Golder to knock him on the side of the head, cutting of anything else he might have said as stars danced across his vision accompanied by Trini's pleading voice. "Now don't pass out on us, Maggling." Rita simpered, stepping closer and grabbing his chin to force him to meet her gaze. "You still have some information for me, don't you? Don't tell her anything, Harry." Trini shouted again, still struggling with two putties holding her arms. "Whatever she wants, don't tell her." She was silenced when one putty shifted its hand into a large sphere and slammed it into her stomach, dropping her to the ground and leaving her gasping and coughing. "I had anticipated that bit of nobility on your part, Power Ranger, but you're only here as incentive." Harry was confused now. Incentive? Trini was supposed to be incentive to make him talk? What? "I see you're confused, Maggling." Rita smirked before reaching into her robes and pulling something out. "Perhaps you recognize this then?" It was a metal band, perhaps 2 inches thick, with a buckle on each end that, when they met, would form a ring. He had never seen the one he wore, but he was more than able to take a guess as to what the object was. Another subservience collar. Seeing the recognition in his eyes, Rita moved swiftly over and buckled it around Trini's neck before stepping back just as the girl lashed out in yet another attempt to break free from the putties. "What is this thing, Rita?" Rita just cackled before turning back to Harry. "Now, Maggling, you will tell me what I want to know or I will torture your girlfriend here. What magics were you thinking of?" "Harry, don't." Harry found himself completely unsure of what to do. He couldn't tell Rita of the unforgivable curses, but he couldn't let Trini get tortured by the collar she now wore either. Rita didn't give him more than a few seconds before she spoke again. "So, still refusing, eh? Admirable, I suppose, but ultimately futile. Yellow Ranger, Trini is it? Stop breathing." Trini's face twisted in confusion before her eyes widened a mere fraction of a second before she let out the most heart-rending, soul-piercing scream of pain Harry had ever heard. The 2 putties holding her released their hold, allowing Trini to fall to the ground where she spent the next several seconds writhing in pain. Harry almost immediately tried to stand from the desk seat, but Golder's grip firmed up to the point of being painful. As the armored fingers dug into his shoulders and the attached monster laughed all the louder, Harry could only shout out his denial. "No! Stop this! Then tell me what I want to know, Maggling. Stop the collar and I will. Tell me first." Harry was panicked now. His entire existence focused on Trini, his teammate, his girlfriend, contorting in pain as the magic of the subservience collar raced through her body. And with an order like Rita gave, for her to stop breathing, the pain would only compound each time she took another breath to scream. It was a situation Harry had experienced before. Finally, he couldn't watch anymore. "All right, they're called the Unforgivables, and dash." Harry was cut off by a loud explosion from somewhere else in the palace and was thrown to the floor when the entire room shook violently around him, appending the desk he sat at. From what Harry had been able to gather, they were currently in the heart of the place, so the explosion was either close by or quite powerful indeed. It was then that Harry realized that all noise had stopped, including Trini's screaming. He chanced a glance up, expecting the worst, only to find Trini standing once more, gazing toward the doorway into the classroom with an uncharacteristically intense look on her face. It took a few more seconds before Harry noticed that Rita shared that look. "Golder, you and the Twin Man go and see what that blast was." "Yes, Empress," Golder responded immediately. Harry's eyes went wide when Trini reached up and ripped the metal collar off of her neck as if it were nothing before responding. "Were you able to get the information you needed, Empress?" "What?" Harry's mind was still spinning as Rita spoke. "It was enough for a starting point. Perhaps once I have an explanation for the explosion we'll try for more, but this will do for now." Rita crouched down next to Harry and patted his cheek condescendingly. "Thank you for your help, Maggling." Harry's eyes shot back and forth between Trini and Rita, confused. "But I don't what?" Trini's face twisted into an evil-looking smirk before she was overtaken by a flash of light, revealing the Twin Man beneath the illusion. Then the monster spoke, still using Trini's voice. "You have been tricked once again by the illusions of the Twin Man, Magi Ranger." Harry's last vision before he blacked out was of the monster running out of the room, assumedly to catch up with Golder, while Rita slowly stood and walked out as if on a casual stroll. "He is, Tommy. Come on, Harry, wake up. Wake up, Harry." Harry found himself drifting on the edge of full consciousness, roused slightly by a slight smacking sensation on his cheek. "We don't have a lot of time, Kim. There's no telling when they'll figure out what happened. I think he's coming around now, Tommy. Come on, Harry, we need to get moving." Harry groaned as the room swam into focus. The first thing he registered was that he was lying on his back in the stone classroom he had spent most of his time in during his captivity. The second thing he noticed was the pink helmet gazing down at him impassively while a white-gloved hand tried to lightly slap consciousness into him. "Harry?" Kimberly asked, urgency in her voice. "Harry, can you hear me?" Harry let out another soft groan and raised a hand to the side of his head where a throbbing pain reminded him of Golder's blow when, "Trini. Is Trini all right?" Kimberly tilted her head slightly before glancing up. Harry followed the tilt of her visor and caught sight of Tommy, also in morph, standing near the doorway to the room. "I'm pretty sure that Trini's fine, Harry," she said slowly. "At least I know she was before we came to rescue you." "But she was here," Harry stammered briefly before his eyes went wide as his memory snapped back into place. "Oh Merlin, what have I done?" "Harry?" Kimberly asked, concerned. Harry let his arm fall back down to his side as he stared blankly up at the ceiling. Sure, he hadn't told her anything about the unforgivables beyond their collective classification, but something about the satisfaction in Rita's voice told him that that was more than enough to spell trouble for the Earth. "We really don't have time for this now, guys," Tommy interjected. "It won't be long before Rita and her goons figure out what happened." Kimberly nodded firmly. As the Rangers were wont to do during tense situations, Harry blamed the grid for the otherwise out-of-character actions from his teammates. "Tommy's right, Harry. Can you stand?" Harry closed his eyes tightly for a second, doing his best to force his concerns and fears aside, before shrugging. "I don't know, I got clocked upside the head pretty hard before I passed out however long ago that was. I suppose we'll have to find out though." With a slight grunt of effort and no small amount of help from Kimberly, Harry heaved himself up into a sitting position. After pausing briefly for his head to stop swimming, Harry clambered to his feet, once more with the Pink Ranger's assistance. Harry's vision blurred out of focus for several moments once he regained his vertical base. It was only because of Kimberly's firm grip on his left arm that he was even able to remain standing. Finally steadying himself, he turned his head toward Kimberly and spoke. "So how did you guys get here?" Tommy left his post by the doorway to the classroom and came over to stand next to Kimberly. "We'll have to give you the full explanation later, or rather have Billy or Alpha do it because I certainly didn't understand half of what they said, but we teleported in. We actually landed on the surface of the moon and had to make our way here on foot. Anyway, are you ready to morph?" Harry blinked at the info dump, limited though it was, before shaking his head slowly. "I can't morph, that is heck. I can't even leave this freaking room with this DMN collar on." Kimberly tilted her head in confusion while Tommy turned to anxiously look towards the doorway again. "What do you mean, Harry?" Harry sighed. "This collar I have on causes me incredible, crippling pain if I break one of Rita's commands. Of course, 2 of those commands were to not morph and to not leave this room without her say so. Though even without the collar, Rita still has my power coin, so I couldn't morph anyway." Kimberly and Tommy both flinched, Harry's words apparently poking holes in their rescue plan. "Was that all she ordered?" Kimberly asked hesitantly. Harry shook his head ruefully. "No, I also can't use wandless magic and can't use my wand on anyone in the palace. Beyond that, she ordered me to teach her my magic. Anytime we weren't in lessons, she kept my power coin herself and only gave it back at the start of each new lesson. I managed to avoid teaching her too much of any real use, but right before you guys showed up," Harry's eyes reflected his own inner dread as he looked into the visors of his fellow Rangers one after the other. "I messed up, guys, big time." Neither Kimberly nor Tommy said anything immediately. Harry could guess that they probably wanted to ask for more clarification, but held themselves back in light of the previously stated tight schedule. Finally, Kimberly crouched down a few inches, putting her visor on level with Harry's neck and the subservience collar. "Well then, looks like we'll just have to get this collar off you before we can get out of here, get your coin back, and get back to Earth." Harry snorted despite himself. "There's a sentence I never thought I'd hear outside of a bad joke." Tommy chuckled weakly while Kimberly continued to study the collar for several seconds. Finally, she nodded and stood straight again. "All right, I should be able to get this thing off of you with my blade blaster. The lock doesn't look too sturdy as best I can tell, so it shouldn't be too much trouble." Harry flinched back almost reflexively as his pink-clad teammate drew her blaster and swiftly twisted it into its bladed configuration. Then, her words registered. "Hang on a second. Did you say this thing has a lock on it?" Kimberly looked at him for a moment before responding. "Yeah, there's a little buckle right under your chin with a keyhole on it. It looks like that's all that's holding it in place. Are you saying you didn't know about that? And more specifically, does it even matter?" Tommy interjected, sounding as if he'd like nothing more than to get moving. Not that Harry could blame him, of course. Taking a deep breath and running his plan over in his head quickly to make sure he couldn't think of any issues with it, Harry spoke. "All right, so instead of having you swinging your weapon around my throat, why don't I try to unlock the collar with a spell?" Kimberly immediately saw an issue with his plan. But Harry, you said that the collar would react if you used wandless magic. Harry nodded. Yes, but I'm betting that if the collar is unlocked that it won't activate, or else one of you two will be able to pull it off of me before it hits me too hard. If the spell doesn't work at all, then you can take your shot at cutting it off. I'd just prefer to try other options before running the risk of having my throat slashed, no offense. Kimberly glanced down at her blade blaster self-consciously before flinching slightly. Ah yeah, I see your point. She glanced helplessly over at Tommy, who shrugged and moved to stand closer again. How about this then, Tommy said, pulling his dragon dagger from wherever it went when he wasn't wielding it. You try your magic and Kim stands ready to try and yank it off if necessary. If the collar gets triggered, I'll take the slice. Harry nodded, feeling his nerves settle a bit at the thought of the more experienced martial artist and weapons user being the one making the cut. That works for me, let's give it a shot. If the collar does kick in, I'll try to stay as still as I can, but you might have to help hold me in place, Kim. Fair warning. Kimberly's stance communicated her uncertainty, but she still nodded firmly and holstered her blade blaster as she moved to stand behind him, opposite Tommy. Seeing that Kimberly was in place and Tommy had his weapon ready to lash out, Harry took a deep breath and reached for his magic. He was embarrassed to admit, even if only to himself, that he had fallen out of practice with wandless spells since he got his power coin. Admittedly, he had had a whole new type of magic to learn, not to mention everything else on his plate as of late, but that didn't excuse him falling out of condition for such a useful skill that he had prided himself on in the past. Mad-Eye would have been quite angry with him. Luckily though, it only took a moment for Harry to get back into the swing of getting in touch with his magic. As he drew it up from his core and into his right hand, he internally decided to add wandless magic exercises to his daily routine, if only to stay in form. He just wondered if he would have enough time in the day for everything he was finding to do. Harry shook himself lightly and refocused. He needed to get out of Rita's palace first, and that meant getting rid of this collar. Without giving himself any more time to reconsider, Harry reached up with his magically charged hand and tapped the collar directly below his chin where Kimberly had indicated the lock was and cast his spell. Alohomora. There was a brief build-up of power in the collar before, with a soft click, it came loose and fell off of him and to the ground with a clatter. Well, that was far easier than he had expected it to be. He was sure that Kimberly and Tommy would have shared his exasperated and relieved expression if he had been able to see their faces, but Tommy put that thought to rest when he sprang back into action. Alright, so you're good to get out of here now, right? No more surprise magic stuff from Rita? Harry shook his head. No. Other than getting my coin back, which means we'll have to face off against Rita at some point, we should be good to go. Nodding in response, Tommy moved to stand by the doorway again and peeked out for a moment. Then, he leaned back in and waved to them. Let's go, the coast is still clear. The sooner we get out of here the better I'll feel. Harry and Kimberly, not inclined to stick around any longer than they had to either, shared a glance and a nod before following the Green Ranger out of the classroom and into the hallway beyond. As the three Rangers, two morphed and one not, snuck through the halls, each felt their nerves resting on edge. Harry, with the memory of his lessons from Moody at the edge of his thoughts, thought to cast silencing charms on their feet, quieting their footsteps. He had initially considered disillusioning them as well, but thought better of it from a tactical standpoint. While Harry might not be too bothered by not being able to see his teammates if they were all casting spells at their opponents, Tommy and Kimberly were much more likely to get physical with any opposition. It could cause problems if none of them could see each other clearly. They had left Harry's classroom/prison a few minutes before and, other than a quick pause for Harry to silence their footsteps, they had been moving constantly. Harry was more than a little concerned with the lack of resistance, but he knew that he couldn't do anything but stay on guard and hope for the best. Kimberly was apparently having similar concerns, though she decided to voice hers as they crept down the dimly lit hallways of Rita's palace. I don't like this, guys, she whispered. We came down this way before and had to hide from putties more than once, but now. Yeah, Tommy agreed grimly. I know it's kind of cliché, but it really is too quiet around here. Harry only hummed his agreement before casting a detection spell. The spell reported no one else nearby, which only increased his paranoia even further. Finally, after a few more halls and corners had passed, Harry spoke up. So, where are we headed exactly? Tommy glanced back at Harry over his shoulder before responding. The plan called for us to blast a hole in the side of Rita's palace with a rather strong explosive Billy cooked up and then teleport up to the balcony to get in. After that, we were planning to head for the hole we made on our way out. The idea was that it wouldn't take them long to decide that we had gotten in another way and try and figure out where, which would leave the actual hole less defended than otherwise, so we would be able to get out easier. Harry ran that plan through his mind quickly and immediately pinged on an issue. Even if things were to work out that way, it still doesn't address Rita having my power coin. Tommy nodded as he continued leading the three through the palace. I know, which is why we're heading right for the balcony. I figure Rita will be there still and, let's be honest, I doubt any of them would expect us charging into the heart of Rita's fortress in an attempt to make our escape. Kimberly and I will have to do our best to hold back Golder and any putties that may also be there, maybe Scorpina too, but that will leave Rita and getting your power coin back up to you, Harry. While Kimberly was behind him, Harry could still almost feel her initial surprise and unease followed by a grim determination to do what needed to be done. Harry himself was feeling more than a bit uncomfortable with the plan, not in the least because he was once more without his ranger suit for protection. He hadn't missed his overall vulnerability from before attaining his power coin, but with the proper planning and no small amount of luck they might just be able to escape unscathed. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 10. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and 10-star 12 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video, till then goodbye.